color. But he says, so like I said,
you say 68D, is that right?
D, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I mean, there were sections of this where, I'm not gonna lie, it's just, you kind of have to slog through it, but it's a lot. I hope it's the measure of my progress, because I remember when I used to read this, it was just, I just want to get through it as quickly as I could. But yeah, 68D. So this is right after he talks about the colors and the variations, and then he talks about things are dazzling, bright, brilliant. And then he says, talks about the different hues. So this is right at the D mark. Says, as for the other hues, it should be fairly clear from the above cases by what mixtures they are to be represented in a way that preserves our likely story. But if anyone in considering these matters were to put them to an actual test, he would demonstrate his ignorance of the difference between the human and the divine. It is God who possesses both the knowledge and power required to mix a plurality into a unity, and conversely to dissolve a unity into a plurality, while no human being could possess either of these, whether at the present time or at any time in the future. And then he brings in I don't know, there's so much that could be said. I mean, for one, that makes me think, there's the God who possesses the knowledge to make a plurality into a unity. I think you could, in a straightforward way, interpret as the sort of imbuing of the elemental chaos with a type of order. But what do you make of dissolving unity into plurality? I mean, is that a reflection of the nature of generation corruption, or is it, because it's described as a power, and as far as I could tell, as far as I could follow the dialogue, and I'm sorry if this is a bit dispersed the way I'm describing this, but Timaeus goes through, I think, two almost accounts, two likely stories. The first, before he introduces necessity, right? And then he goes again at it, and he brings in necessity, and he brings in or not necessity, but he brings in the third element, which is the mixing bowl or the receptacle. And he also calls necessity, I believe, the strain cause. So to try to bring all these together, is there, at least from this very or somewhat enigmatic statement of it's the God who has the ability to turn a plurality into unity and to dissolve a unity into plurality. I don't know, it doesn't strike me as, unless I'm missing something, it doesn't strike me as something that you would really find in Plato, that the dissolution of unity into plurality would be a power that would seem to be maybe just a consequence of necessity and the strain cause of dissolution, unless you could read this as a type of the dispersion of or the correspondence between the archetype and the many different participants in multiplicity.
Yeah, this translation here has for God only has the knowledge and also the power, which are able to combine many things into one, and again resolve the one into many. So that sounds like it is that ordering power, like in a sense, like only God is able to order things in that primordial way, and also to kind of, for them to come apart. It's I'm trying to get it right in the sense of like, because there is creation ex nihilo, right? So I think it's very common, God has the power over life and death, right? Kind of there's sort of, what's the opposite? Entropy, but then what's the opposite of entropy? I don't know it. Kind of, but that you know what I mean? Kind of the so in that way, I don't know. I guess it is that.
Let's see. Your translation says resolve or dissolve.
Resolve, yes. For God only has the knowledge and also the power, which are able to combine many things into one, and again resolve the one into many. But no man either is or ever will be able to accomplish either the one or the other operation. So it's kind of like, God has that power. Man does not have that power, right? It's kind of like the injunctions you see in different scriptures, right? It's kind of like, we in the Bible about he can't add a year to his life or a hair on his head or something.
Mhm.
Kind of I think it's that kind of an idea. It's sort of distinguishing between the divine power and the human power, so the human power is obviously we are able to manipulate things technically, and in some way we could say that we participate, we imitate that ordering power and also the dissolving power, but nevertheless it's an attenuated emulation on our part, right? We can't really fully ascend or go that essentially to there is just this chasm qualitatively even when we take it as far as we can go with it. That's sort of what it says to me. I probably think of, sure there are other ways that one could think of it. That is a very interesting passage.
What do you given? Well, what I was trying to get at with that is because, like I said, maybe I kind of wasn't paying all that much attention, but it seemed like he had gone about it. Timaeus had given two renditions, and somewhere, I mean, I'll try to find the section, but he says something like, let us go back to the beginning and give the account again. But from what I remember, in the second part, he brings up necessity, calls it the strain cause. Now, do you think that do you think maybe my vision's colored by that book I read over the break, but is that, do you think that's Empedoclean in the sense of maybe like being, because he talks about being, becoming, I believe, and necessity. Maybe I'm mixing things up, but it seemed like there was a type of duality or dyadic relationship between, I think it was being and necessity. I'll try to find it, but it seemed like that would have been something akin to maybe love and strife. Although, to be fair, he doesn't call it strife. Am I making any sense here?
I think so.
40.
Go ahead.
48a, born of intellect and necessity. So yeah, 48a. Let me see. So it's earlier. Yeah, so I can read the passage unless. Yeah, so 48a. So I believe this comes right after he talks about the role of, well, he calls it the intellect now, but there's he wants to go and recapitulate. So he says, now in all but a brief part of the discourse I have just completed, I have presented what has been crafted by intellect. But I need to match this account by providing a comparable one concerning the things that have come about by necessity. For this ordered world is of mixed birth. It is the offspring of a union of necessity and intellect. Intellect prevailed over necessity by persuading it to direct most of the things that come to be towards what is best, and the result of the subjugation of necessity to wise persuasion was the initial formation of the universe. So if I'm to tell the story of how it really came to be in this way, I'd also have to introduce the character of the strain cause, how it is its nature to set things adrift. And then he kind of goes back and gives a new speech, and he introduces the receptacle. Now, I don't know, like I said, this seems to be I don't know if there's all that much on love and strife in Empedocles, but at least from the the book that I had read, there seems like there's a type of, maybe not tension. Now, fair enough, there is the intellect persuades necessity and subjugates it, but you know, it just makes you think that all this talk about harmonies and proportions and you know, and this kind of, you know, this just order. I mean, is there something to be said for, and maybe it's just very obvious, that, you know, even if we can reproduce the harmonies in this world through music or even in the soul, I think, although maybe the soul, because it's immaterial, it's easier. I mean, wouldn't you say there's a hint of, maybe not pessimism, but there's a hint of acknowledging that sort of, I don't know, inclination to chaos and disorder in the world itself? And I suppose I'm yeah, well, I'm just trying to, sorry, I'll just say this, sorry, they must have heard me speaking about paganism or something. But no, I guess it's tenuous because these appear in very different parts of the dialogue. But when I had read that section I just quoted about the, you know, it's only the God that has the power to bind unity to multiplicity and break unity down into multiplicity. I mean, my view of it was that I personally, I didn't read Demiurge, unless I'm missing something, as having the kind of the power of corruption. I thought in the same way that like an Abrahamic God can, you know, will ordain death or ordain corruption. It seemed like that's sort of just in the design, in the, it's part of necessity. It's part of us being having a material existence. So it was a little ambiguous to me. Maybe it just is ambiguous that, you know, you have the demiurge, then you have intellect and necessity. The demiurge seems to be working off of the kind of paradigms where the world, which I assume, you know, in kind of later Platonism would be the world of the forms. But necessity would seem to be kind of, in the one sense, the intellect subjugates necessity, but doesn't necessity in some way strong arm not the demiurge, not the work of the demiurge, but sort of puts you know, it's the seed of corruption in all of kind of the things that participate in the forms that were made by the demiurge. I don't know, those are just sort of musings, but
yeah, sure. I'm just thinking of the you've probably seen me share this little piece, this little poem from Alexander Pope before, right? Maybe. I'm very fond of this excerpt from his essay on man, Epistle 3. Look round our world, behold the chain of love, combining all below and all above. See plastic nature working to this end, the single atoms each to other tend, attracted to the next in place, formed and impelled its neighbor to embrace. See matter next with various life endued, press to one center still the general good. See dying vegetables life sustain, see life dissolving vegetate again. All forms that perish other forms supply, by turns we catch the vital breath and die, like bubbles on the sea of matter born. They rise, they break, and to that sea return. Nothing is foreign, parts relate to whole. One all extending, all preserving soul connects each being greatest with the least, made beast innate of man and man of beast. All served, all serving, nothing stands alone. The chain holds on, and where it ends, unknown. So it's interesting because it's you know, even in at the material level, there's this kind of sense of the intricate, you know, the intimately interconnected nature of things, and that comes through. But even just I think we're not used to thinking of matter in that way. There's kind of even in that force that unifies and also just in the dissolution of forms, right? You see this sparkling intelligible reality shining through. Um, I don't know if I have. I'm not the best at giving dialectical answers. I'll always just cite poetry or something.
Well, no, I think that's the noble and the proper way, to be honest. But no, that did make. I mean, in some ways, I was neglecting. If you do take another way of looking at maybe of that first quote of the the power to bind multiplicity into unity and unity multiplicity. I mean, you could take the latter part as well, in some ways, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, the eternity of, wasn't there a quite a well, I don't think it was that long, but it was a pretty succinct text on the eternity of the species in the Middle Ages. I can't remember who was by, but it was on the Aristotelian idea of that there can be a type of, what is it, that something can like, that the eternal life of the world, at least in terms of species, could be understood through, not through the life of any specific member, but through the constant endless generation of parent to child and so on.
Mm.
So I suppose in some ways that dissolution, which is death, is really I mean, this is quite trite because you see this in a lot of places, but I don't think it's really bound philosophically to a type of argument in many places. But you could, I guess you could look at that dissolution as the end of one phase and the beginning of the next. So in the same way that a parent or two parents will give birth to multiple offspring, there's a passing on. So I suppose you could take it that way. But I also, I mean, now I'm just kind of going as it comes to me. I think there's also the, I mean, I remember reading this in a couple of books, but these were like early 20th century books by scholars of classicists and kind of scholars of Rome and Greece. And I don't know enough Greek to really substantiate this, but there is I remember I was reading one book, it might have been Guthrie or somebody else. And the idea was that, the thing that separated man from God, and you see it in Plato too, I think you even see it here, was not so much virtue versus, the virtuous perfect moral gods versus the immoral man. But it was more this kind of tension between the immortal and the mortal. You see it in drama, you see it in almost, I guess, the tragedies of a lot of these protagonists are actually demigods of some sort or another. So they're at least symbolically part of the eternal and part of the undying and part of the mortal suffering world. So they're kind of an isthmus between these two. And even here, he says something about, Athena is the one who founded, Sais, or the city in Egypt, and then also of Athens. So they're kind of sister cities. And didn't he say something like, when the priest was telling Solon, she wanted to found a city that was like her, or the people, the progeny, the people of Athens. I think something like, they were to be the closest likenesses to her, and so she instituted these perfect laws and all that. So I think, I mean, do you think it'd be too far to say, or is it just something I think about sometimes, that this kind of, you see it in Plato, but this striving of the mortal to imitate the immortal, or just to nurture the immortal aspect of us. I mean, maybe that's, where was I going with this? Well, maybe, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is that if that's the difference between man and God, it's not simply, the gods are moral and we're not, but if it's more this tension between mortality and immortality, then I think it's probably mirrored in the tension philosophically between being and becoming in the world, world of generation. So I suppose this whole business about dissolution and joining in unity, I just wonder if necessity doesn't articulate itself. So in the same way that the difference between the gods and man would be one of mortality, immortality, not of morality per se, maybe necessity. has some role or some mysterious role in explaining the kind of just the sheer limitation of man, the sheer, finitude, the mortality of him. I don't know.
As I recall, there's also in the Timaeus, doesn't it speak of there being that part of the soul which is eternal,
Yeah,
and that part which is not, right?
yeah, but it seems, doesn't he say something like towards the end? There's, he doesn't use this word, but there's a type of discombobulation when we descend, and that the orbits are kind of thrown off. And I think he uses it in the plural, which I meant to bring up or ask, because the way I would interpret that is maybe perhaps each orbit was one of the powers of the soul. I really don't know, but there has to be a type of restoration of the harmony.
Right, and then so that's sort of part of, like, you, in order to restore that harmony, there are various things one can do. I mean, I think you were here when we were talking about music as therapy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, but, and I don't want to take the thread too far, because maybe it just collapses. But I think maybe that's, I've only read a little bit of tragedies, but I think maybe that's kind of part and parcel of maybe the tragic, if I can sound a little bit pompous for a second, in the sense that whereas it seems like animals lacking the rational spirit, lacking the kind of eternal part, and plants, they will, it seems like, actually degenerate and die, and they will only be survived in their in their progeny. Man, on the other hand, has to, well, I mean, from the bit of, I guess, what we could call reincarnation, or what is it, metempsychosis here, and then I think we see it again in the Republic and the Gorgias even, I think. In any case, it comes up more than once, and actually, so I hate to keep bringing Sahrawari into this, but even he speaks of a type of reincarnation. I think maybe that's, maybe it suits the kind of tragic, dramatized aspect that we see in the tragedies with these demigods, because there's no end to the suffering if you're, well, there could be, but it could be many lifetimes if you're a bastard, or a tyrant, or some horrible man. You have to you don't atone for it in hell, you atone for it as a frog or something. So to me, that sounds without having studied drama, that sounds pretty tragic, a lot more than just gone. But
hello Victor, how you doing?
yeah, I'm still here. I just gotta,
Glad you could join us. Let's see.
Yeah, I guess the main discussion has come to an end, right?
Yeah, we were very focused on stuff we could discuss with Professor Sebastian Mora there, but now this is more general, thinking about the dialogue and other things we've been reading. I don't know if did you get a chance to delve into the Timaeus or some of the commentary or secondary sources that we were sharing in the group?
Yeah, I just started reading the beginning of some introductions, so I'm not very far along. Yeah.
Was there a particular intro that of the ones that I shared that looked good to you, that you think you might want to do that one?
Let me look at them again. Or have most of them been kind of taken up, or?
Yeah, so there was the Simon Oliver one from Philosophy, God in Motion, where he uses the Timaeus as a jumping off point, and then he goes into Aristotle and other figures all the way up through Newton to look at motion. And And there's another couple of ones that focus particularly on,
I guess,
like,
I was interested. I mean, I guess the one that intrigued me was the Eileen Das one about
oh yeah,
one that involved Galen and the Arab reception.
yeah, that is fascinating. And yeah, it definitely, I mean, prior to these sessions, I was kind of aware of the way that, the conception of the humors and the elements, right, in Galenic medicine are intricately connected to sort of the Ptolemaic cosmos and some of these other things. But I think that study would be helpful to see much more directly kind of the correlations. I mean, because I was listening to that. There's a talk of hers that I shared underneath the file, which I think is helpful. But kind of they had different views of the importance of the brain or of the heart in ancient medicine. And I think interestingly, this dialogue really invests the head with a lot of symbolic importance. Kind of not only because it's spherical, but partially for that reason. So I think that's very interesting.
Yes, hence the interest in phonology throughout history. Yeah.
Let's see. So I'm sort of looking to the dialogue itself. As you saw, right? I mean, the opening portion of it is really all kind of political and sort of really seems to be recapitulating the Republic, although with a few differences of detail. Right. See, so how far did you get in the Timaeus? Just to let's see.
Yeah.
Because kind of the real substance of it really starts after all that description of the ideal state, and then he says, and now Timaeus, you I suppose should speak next after duly calling upon the gods. All men, Socrates, who have any degree of right feeling at the beginning of every enterprise, whether small or great, always call upon God. And we too, who are going to discourse of the nature of the universe, how created or how existing without creation, if we be not altogether out of our wits, must invoke the aid of gods and goddesses and pray that our words may be acceptable to them and consistent with themselves. Let this then be our invocation of the gods, to which I add an exhortation of myself to speak in such manners will be most intelligible to you and will most accord with my own intent. First then, in my judgment, we must make a distinction and ask, what is that which always is and has no becoming? And what is that which is always becoming and never is? That which is apprehended by intelligence and reason is always in the same state, but that which is conceived by opinion with the help of sensation and without reason is always in a process of becoming and perishing and never really is. And this is very reminiscent of the, and if you ever read Parmenides, where he speaks about kind of the realm of truth and the realm of opinion, in a sense that that which is always is, right? And this is true, I think, more generally of Plato's view that all appearances are sort of in between being and non-being, right? It's the forms that have being, properly speaking, but then kind of the reflections of those forms, they're sort of projection in the sensory world. Like the sensible is an image of the intellectual, and the intelligible is precisely as he says, right? That which is apprehended by intelligence and reason is always in the same state, right? So the intelligible is beyond that sort of changeability, right? What is always becoming and perishing and never is, and that's, I guess, sort of that Heraclitean flux. So he's sort of drawing those accounts together of like Parmenides and Heraclitus and obviously other figures. Now, everything that becomes or is created must of necessity be created by some cause. For without a cause, nothing can be created, right? And that's sort of the ex nihilo nihil fit, right? From nothing, nothing comes, right? So you see, well, I love this, that how much is of subsequent metaphysics is already packed into here. There's another article which you guys should check out in the group where this scholar Anna Sumphai argues that really the crux of the Timaeus is to teach what analogy is, right? Kind of like, because we'll come to it later. There's like this section where he's analogizes the elements to each other, like I can't remember the order, but it's like something like fire is to water as earth is to air or something. Or that's not the correct order probably, but like, and those are, there's like, I forget the name. That's probably the most proper sense of analogy in the subsequent tradition, is like, you know, A is to B as C is to D is one style of analogy. And then I can't remember what the other one is, but it's another very common construal of what analogy is, you know, which is, but yeah, so I definitely would recommend that article on analogy.
What I was reading was
Yes.
Steele's introduction to the Timaeus in his Hackett edition. So that he gives a really good overview of the English language scholarship on
Great.
this aspect of the Timaeus and literal and metaphorical approaches and why,
Nice.
in my opinion, it's been misread so terribly.
Who wait, sorry, whose introduction?
It's Donald Zale, his Hackett edition
Okay,
of Timaeus.
yeah. Mhm.
It's a very long prefatory introduction to his
Oh, yeah,
translation.
I see. I think a lot of people say that's a good translation. There are, gosh, so very many. I'm looking. This right now is the Jowett, and he is, I think, the last person to have successfully translated all of the dialogues. One man. This is quite remarkable, but the work of the creator, and if anything occurs to you like that, kind of, you know, feel free to interrupt me. The work of the creator, whenever he looks to the unchangeable and fashions the form and nature of his work after an unchangeable pattern, must necessarily be made fair and perfect. And fair is, of course, elsewhere be translated beautiful, right? He only can create in the most beautiful way. Of course, I think of the it's similar to the hadith in the Islamic tradition that God is beautiful and he loves beauty, right? That kind of there's this way that beauty is most characteristic of the way in which the creator creates. But when he looks to the created only, right? Whenever he looks to the unchangeable and fashions the form and nature of his work after an unchangeable pattern, right? Then it must be fair and perfect, beautiful, perfect. But when he looks to the created only and uses a created pattern, it is not fair or perfect. Was the heaven then, or the world, whether called by this or by any other more appropriate name? Assuming the name, I'm asking a question which has to be asked at the beginning of an inquiry about anything. Was the world, I say, always in existence and without beginning? Or created and had it a beginning? Created, I reply, being visible and tangible and having a body and therefore sensible. And all sensible things are apprehended by opinion and sense and are in a process of creation and created. So of course, this is contrary to the very common view among the ancients that the world was without beginning. Right? I believe Aristotle held that opinion. He didn't really find plausible the idea that there was a beginning to the cosmos. But you can see how this is very amenable to subsequent Abrahamic interpretations. That that he understood something. Plato understood something that not everybody did, and so he had that intuition about the origins of things. Now that which is created must, as we affirm, of necessity be created by a cause. But the father and maker of all this universe is past finding out. And even if we found him, to tell him to all men would be impossible. And there is still a question to be asked about him. Which of the patterns had the artificer in view when he made the world? The pattern of the unchangeable or of that which is created? If the world be indeed fair and the artificer good, it is manifest that he must have looked to that which is eternal. But if what cannot be said without blasphemy is true, then to the created pattern. Everyone will see that he must have looked to the eternal, for the world is the fairest of creations, and he is the best of causes. And having been created in this way, the world has been framed in the likeness of that which is apprehended by reason and mind and is unchangeable, and must therefore of necessity, if this is admitted, be a copy of something. Now it is all important that the beginning of everything should be according to nature. And in speaking of the copy and the original, we may assume that words are akin to the matter which they describe. That's an interesting point, right? So this is why it seems like this is part of why we can say that Plato is a realist, not a nominalist, right? That there's an adequation between the idea and the reality, right? The thought and the thing, the word and the thing. See, yeah, words are akin to the matter which they describe. There's a likeness, but of course, as soon as we say likeness, right, because we're not saying an identity, right? But it's analogy, that there's a likeness which is neither total similarity nor total unlike. So right, the words are akin to the matter which they describe. When they relate to the lasting and permanent and intelligible, they ought to be lasting and unalterable, and as far as their nature allows, irrefutable and immovable, nothing less. But when they express only the copy or likeness and not the eternal things themselves, they need only be likely and analogous to the real words. as being is to becoming, so is truth to believe. Right. So becoming is not totally other than being, right? That's also crucial, right? Becoming is like being, right? It stands in relation to it. It's not that there's being and there's becoming and they're just like, you know, totally separate spheres. They're, you know, it's just like, was it Plato? Am I getting this right? That time is the moving image of eternity. I think that's what he said. Time is the moving image of eternity. So I guess becoming is to being in that analogous way. That you know, and opinion and truth, right, is the sort of like in Parmenides when he speaks of aletheia and doxa, I think. Right, there's, you know, the goddess speaks of the way of truth and the way of opinion, but it's I guess in the Platonic way of understanding it, the way of opinion is not merely false, but in some way it is like that which is true, though not perfectly. If then Socrates, amid the many opinions about the gods and the generation of the universe, we are not able to give notions which are altogether and in every respect exact and consistent with one another, do not be surprised enough if we adduce probabilities as likely as any others, for we must remember that I, who am the speaker, and you who are judges, are only mortal men, and we ought to accept the tale which is probable and inquire no further. Excellent, Timaeus, and we will do precisely as you bid us. The prelude is charming and is already accepted by us. May we beg of you to proceed to the strain? Let me tell you then why the Creator made this world of generations. He was good, and the good can never have any jealousy of anything. And this is already, right, you see the parallel with Genesis, right, where God pronounces things good, right? And of course, in more advanced theological conceptions of God, that he is the good. And so in a sense, like, and it's from that it will proceed that what he makes must be good. Just as he is the beautiful, he creates the universe beautifully. He is the good, what he makes is good. Right. And so the good can never have any jealousy of anything. And being free from jealousy, he desired that all things should be as like himself as they could be. Right. This is in the truest sense the origin of creation and of the world, as we shall do well in believing on the testimony of wise men. God desired that all things should be good and nothing bad, so far as this was attainable. It's an important proviso. Right. It's kind of like in, you know, what is it that we are to seek in sanctification or deification in the, say, in the Christian tradition, or in the Islamic tradition, you know, kind of the ideal of the perfect man, the insan al-kamil, right? You see something very analogous in other traditions too, kind of that, you know, to be like God or the principle of all things insofar as possible, which is sort of to be assimilated to it. And I guess it's similar to that passage later about like restoring the lost, or the order that's lost, right? When we descend and sort of enter into our embodiment, and you know, even though in that, right, kind of in that realm of forms, we sort of emerge from perfection, but we've become discombobulated, and so we just have to harmonize ourselves in attending to, you know, what here they refer to the Father, and to kind of the source of the forms. Yes. Wherefore also finding the whole visible sphere not at rest, but moving in an irregular and disorderly fashion. Out of disorder he brought order. It's like out of darkness light, right? Think of in Genesis where he's hovering over the face of the deep. The spirit of the Lord was over the face of the deep, and everything is tohu and bohu in the Hebrew. It's all disorder, and then yeah. Considering that this was in every way better than the other. Now the deeds of the best could never be or have been other than the fairest. And the Creator, reflecting on the things which are by nature visible, found that no unintelligent creature taken as a whole was fairer than the intelligent taken as a whole. And that intelligence could not be present in anything which was devoid of soul. For which reason, when he was framing the universe, he put intelligence in soul and soul in body, that he might be the creator of a work which was by nature fairest and best. Wherefore, using the language of probability, we may say that the world became a living creature truly endowed with soul and intelligence by the providence of God. This being supposed, let us proceed to the next stage. In the likeness of what animal did the Creator make the world? Interesting. Because I'm sure animal in a broader sense, right? You think of the that which is animated, as in like the anima, the soul, that which is living. It would be an unworthy thing to liken it to any nature which exists as a part only. For nothing can be beautiful which is like any imperfect thing. But let us suppose the world to be the very image of that whole, of which all other animals, both individually and in their tribes, are portions. For the original of the universe contains in itself all intelligible beings, just as this world comprehends us and all other visible creatures. For the deity, intending to make this world like the fairest and most perfect of intelligible beings, framed one visible animal comprehending within itself all other animals of a kindred nature. Are we right in saying that there is one world, or that they are many and infinite? This is our friend in there's a post in the group where he says, I think this is where Plato got it wrong, because he's into multiverses and stuff. But Plato is not having that. It's like it's come on, it's the universe. Okay, it's not. It's all turned towards the one. Right. There must be one only, if the created copy is to accord with the original. For that which includes all other intelligible creatures cannot have a second or companion. In that case, there would be need of another living being, which would include both, and of which they would be parts, and the likeness would be more truly said to resemble not them, but that other which included them. Yeah. In order then that the world might be solitary like the perfect animal, the Creator made not two worlds or an infinite number of them, but there is and ever will be one only begotten and created heaven. Now that which is created is of necessity corporeal, and also visible and tangible. And nothing is visible where there is no fire. Now this is important because the elements, right? Like we might think like, what do you mean? Like earth, fire, air, water? Like these just seem like very mundane. This is, but they're really talking in a more essential way about kind of, right? It's like earth is really all that is solid, right? Water is really all that which is fluid. air is really all that which is, I'm getting the word motile. I don't know if that's the right word, but anyway, it's really kind of like talking about, regardless of what the particular substance is, nevertheless, it's like there are these qualities that are all pervasive in kind of the constitution of the universe, right? Like fire, right? So it's not just fire as we normally think of fire, for example. It's yeah, nothing is visible where there is no fire, or tangible which has no solidity, and nothing is solid without earth. Wherefore also God in the beginning of creation made the body of the universe to consist of fire and earth. But two things cannot, this is the famous tertium quid, right? But two things cannot be rightly put together without a third. There must be some bond of union between them. And the fairest bond is that which makes the most complete fusion of itself and the things which it combines. And proportion is best adapted to effect such a union. For whenever in any three numbers, whether cube or square, there is a mean, which is to the last term what the first term is to it. And again, when the mean is to the first term as the last term is to the mean, then the mean becoming first and last, and the first and last both becoming means, they will all of them of necessity come to be the same, and having become the same with one another, will all be one, will be all one. If the universal frame had been created a surface only, if the universal frame had been created a surface only and having no depth, a single mean would have sufficed to bind together itself in the other terms. But now, as the world must be solid, and solid bodies are always compacted, not by one mean, but by two, God placed water and air in the mean between fire and earth. Yay. We're getting another visitor. Hello, Samuel. We're here in the he's just arriving. Yeah, we're reading through the Timaeus. Just we started pretty much from the top of the portion. That's really the not the prologue part or the recapitulation of the Republic, but we're kind of delving into. So here we are, like at 32, I guess, or around there. He's talking about the kind of the elements and their proportion, and he just spoke about the tertium quid. If the universal frame had been created a surface only and having no depth, a single mean would have sufficed to bind together itself in the other terms. But now, as the world must be solid, and solid bodies are always compacted, not by one mean, but by two, God placed water and air in the mean between fire and earth, and made them to have the same proportion so far as was possible. This is it. This is that analogy, right? As fire is to air, so is air to water, and as air is to water, so is water to earth. And thus he bound and put together a visible and tangible heaven. And for these reasons, and out of such elements, which are in number 4, the body of the world was created, and it was harmonized by proportion, and therefore has the spirit of friendship. And having been reconciled to itself, it was indissoluble by the hand of any other than the framer. And that tells you that again, there's that, when he uses the term friendship, obviously something more primordial and than just the how are you doing, Samuel?
I'm good. Can you hear me fine?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
I'm using Wi-Fi, so I'm not sure
Great.
how long this thing will last.
No, sure. Do you have a copy of the Timaeus?
No. Well, actually, I do, but I don't have it on hand because I'm actually sitting outside at the moment.
Oh, sure. All right. Well, if I, as I go through, if there's anything
But
that
I know
occurs,
the text though.
nice.
But yeah,
All right.
I'll
Yeah.
say
And if
something
you
when
have
I
have
forget.
anything you want to chime in with, please feel free. And yeah, and now the creation took up the whole of each of the four elements. For the Creator compounded the world out of all the fire and all the water and all the air and all the earth, leaving no part of any of them nor any power of them outside. His intention was, in the first place, that the animal should be as far as possible a perfect whole and of perfect parts. Secondly, that it should be one, leaving no remnants out of which another such world might be created. And also that it should be free from old age and unaffected by disease. Considering that if heat and cold and other powerful forces which unite bodies surround and attack them from without when they are unprepared, they decompose them, and by bringing diseases and old age upon them, make them waste away. For this cause and on these grounds he made the world one whole, having every part entire, and being therefore perfect and not liable to old age and disease. And he gave to the world the figure which was suitable and also natural. Now to the animal which was to comprehend all animals, that figure was suitable, which comprehends within itself all other figures. Wherefore he made the world in the form of a globe, round as from a lathe, having its extremes in every direction equidistant from the center, the most perfect and the most like itself of all figures. For he considered that the like is infinitely fairer than the unlike. This he finished off, making the surface smooth all around for many reasons. In the first place, because the living being had no need of eyes, when there was nothing remaining outside him to be seen, nor of ears when there was nothing to be heard, and there was no surrounding atmosphere to be breathed, nor would there have been any use of organs by the help of which he might receive his food or get rid of what he had already digested, since there was nothing which went from him or came into him, for there was nothing beside him. Of design he was created thus, his own waste providing his own food, and all that he did or suffered taking place in and by himself. For the Creator conceived that a being which was self-sufficient would be far more excellent than one which lacked anything. And as he had no need to take anything or defend himself against anyone, the Creator did not think it necessary to bestow upon him hands. Nor had he any need of feet, nor of the whole apparatus of walking. But the movement suited to his spherical form was assigned to him, being of all the seven that which is most appropriate to mind and intelligence. And he was made to move in the same manner and on the same spot within his own limits, revolving in a circle. All the other six motions were taken away from him, and he was made not to partake of their deviations. And as this circular movement required no feet, the universe was created without legs and without feet. Such was the whole plan of the eternal God about the God that was to be, to whom for this reason he gave a body, smooth and even, having a surface in every direction, equidistant from the center, a body entire and perfect and formed out of perfect bodies. And in the center he put the soul, which he diffused throughout the body, making it also to be the exterior environment of it. This is important, isn't it? Because he says, which he diffused throughout the body, making it also to be the exterior environment of it. So the soul is in the body, but the body is in the soul, which is a little tricky to wrap your head around, or have it wrapped around your head. But I think there's a truth to that. And he made the universe a circle moving in a circle, one and solitary, yet by reason of its excellence able to converse with itself and needing no other friendship or acquaintance. Having these purposes in view, he created the world, the blessed God. And I think, if I understand correctly, the circular motion is associated with kind of reversion upon itself, which would be self-knowledge. Now, God did not make the soul after the body, although we are speaking of them in this order. For having brought them together, he would never have allowed that the elder should be ruled by the younger. But this is a random manner of speaking which we have, because somehow we ourselves too are very much under the dominion of chance. Whereas he made the soul in origin and excellence prior to and older than the body, to be the ruler and mistress of whom the body was to be the subject. And he made her out of the following elements, and on this wise: out of the indivisible and unchangeable, and also out of that which is divisible and has to do with material bodies, he compounded a third and intermediate kind of essence, partaking of the nature of the same and of the other. And this compound he placed accordingly in a mean between the indivisible and the divisible and material. He took the three elements of, the same, the other, and the essence, and mingled them into one form, compressing by force the reluctant and unsociable nature of the other into the same. When he had mingled them with the essence, and out of the three made one, he again divided this whole into as many portions as was fitting, each portion being a compound of the same, the other, and the essence. And he proceeded to divide after this manner. First of all, he took away one part of the whole, and then he separated a second part, which was double the first. And then he took away a third part, which was half as much again as the second, and 3 times as much as the first. And he took a fourth part, which was 3 times the third, and a sixth part, which was 8 times the first, and a seventh part, which was 27 times the first. After this, he filled up the double intervals, that is between 1, 2, 4, 8, and the triple, between 1, 3, 9, 27. Cutting off yet other portions from the mixture and placing them in the intervals, so that in each interval there were 2 kinds of means, the one exceeding and exceeded by equal parts of its extremes, as for example, 1, 4/3, 2, in which the mean 4/3 is 1/3 of 1 more than 1, and 1/3 of 1 less than 2. The other being that kind of mean which exceeds and exceeded by an equal number. This is getting, where there were intervals of 3 halves and of 4/3 and of 9/8 made by the connecting terms in the former intervals, he filled up all the intervals of 4/3 with the interval of 9/8, leaving a fraction over. And the interval to which this fraction expressed was in the ratio of 256 to 243. So I'm still not quite sure what to make of these particular ratios. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts. Yeah, that seems oddly specific, 256 to 243. But I'm sure that's something that we'll get into later, because people have analyzed what these numbers are, like why these particular numbers. I'm sure there's a specific reason.
Was this the, when we were talking about music, was this the ratio that you mentioned? I can't remember.
Yeah, there's definitely a musical, and I mean, we didn't go into all of the, there's just a lot to unpack there, but it definitely was something that we touched on before to some degree. I mean, there's a certain thesis which says that it's like a number generator for a purpose, which is to do with for a musical purpose that kind of generates a particular, I don't know if this means anything, like kind of, I guess, a code of the universe, kind of a, sort of a Pythagorean cosmic harmony out of the, these particular proportions. And that's something I hope to delve into more precisely through some of our, there's a few different secondary sources that draw that out, like get into the, there's the one that Professor Morrow, he wrote his articles and his thesis, but then there's another, it's not that. Anyway, there's this other thesis which is kind of about the cosmic harmony, and kind of really explaining sort of Platonic metaphysics in a musical way that applies to the whole, all kind of the that was very influential in the medieval period and subsequently. But using that musical image. And thus the whole mixture out of which he cut these portions was all exhausted by him. This entire compound he divided lengthwise into two parts, which he joined to one another at the center, like the letter X, and bent them into a circular form, connecting them with themselves and each other at the point opposite to their original meeting point, and comprehending them in a uniform revolution upon the same axis. He made the one the outer and the other the inner circle. Now the motion of the outer circle he called the motion of the same, and the motion of the inner circle the motion of the other or diverse. The motion of the same he carried round by the side to the right, and the motion of the diverse diagonally to the left. And he gave dominion to the motion of the same and like, for that he left single and undivided. But the inner motion he divided in 6 places and made 7 unequal circles, having their intervals and ratios of 2 and 3, 3 of each, and bade the orbits proceed in a direction opposite to one another. And 3, Sun, Mercury, and Venus, he made to move with equal swiftness. And the remaining 4, Moon, Saturn, Mars, and Jupiter, to move with unequal swiftness to the 3 and to one another, but in due proportion. All right, so that was it's a little dense, but I'm also hoping to bring in somebody who can speak specifically to kind of the astronomical or astrological aspect of this dialogue. I've put out kind of feelers to people who specialize in that, and I think some of them might like to present on that. Now, when the Creator had framed the soul according to his will, he formed within her the corporeal universe and brought the two together and united them center to center. The soul interfused everywhere from the center to the circumference of heaven, and of which also she is the external envelopment, herself turning in herself, began a divine beginning of never ceasing and rational life enduring throughout all time. The body of heaven is visible, but the soul is invisible and partakes of reason and harmony. And being made by the best of intellectual and everlasting natures is the best of things created. And because she is composed of the same and of the other and of the essence, these 3, and is divided and united in due proportion, and in her revolutions returns upon herself, the soul, when touching anything which has essence, whether dispersed in parts or undivided, is stirred through all her powers to declare the sameness or difference of that thing and some other, and to what individuals are related and by what affected, and in what way, and how and when, both in the world of generation and in the world of immutable being. And when reason, which works with equal truth, whether she be in the circle of the diverse or of the same, in voiceless silence holding her onward course in the sphere of the self-moved, when reason, I say, is hovering around the sensible world, and when the circle of the diverse also moving truly imparts the intimations of sense to the whole soul, then arise opinions and beliefs, sure and certain. But when reason is concerned with the rational, and the circle of the same moving smoothly declares it, then intelligence and knowledge are necessarily perfected. And if anyone affirms that in which these two are found to be other than the soul, he will say the very opposite of the truth. So this is the animal. When the Father and Creator saw the creature which he had made moving and living, the created image of the eternal gods, he rejoiced, and in his joy determined to make the copy still more like the original. And as this was eternal, he sought to make the universe eternal, so far as might be. Now the nature of the ideal being was everlasting, but to bestow this attribute in its fullness upon a creature was impossible. Wherefore he resolved to have a moving image of eternity. And when he set in order the heaven, he made this image eternal, but moving according to number, while eternity itself rests in unity. And this image we call time, for there were no days and nights and months and years before the heaven was created. But when he constructed the heaven, he created them also. They are all parts of time, and the past and future are created species of time, which we unconsciously but wrongly transfer to the eternal essence. For we say that he was, he is, he will be. But the truth is that is alone is properly attributed to him, and that was and will be are only to be spoken of becoming in time. For they are motions, but that which is immovably the same cannot become older or younger by time, nor ever did or has become, or hereafter will be older or younger, nor is subject at all to any of those states which affect moving and sensible things, and of which generation is the cause. These are the forms of time, which imitates eternity and revolves according to a law of number. Moreover, when we say that what has become is become, and what becomes is becoming, and that what will become is about to become, and that the non-existent is non-existent. All these are inaccurate modes of expression, but perhaps this whole subject will be more suitably discussed on some other occasion. And I think I think that occasion did in fact arrive in the entire history of metaphysics, of time and eternity, and the metaphysics of being, and but yeah, it's just remarkable how much this prefigures the subsequent tradition that will speak in very similar terms of eternity and time, and that which is beyond time and that which is temporal. Time then and the heaven came into being at the same instant, in order that, having been created together, if ever there was to be a dissolution of them, they might be dissolved together. It was framed after the pattern of the eternal nature, that it might resemble this as far as was possible. For the pattern exists from eternity, and the created heaven has been, and is, and will be in all time. Such was the mind and thought of God. Nice you could join us, and looking forward to meeting again next week. We'll have a presentation on music by our friend Jacob, and then the following week will be Professor Sebastian Moro doing his presentation on his specialty in the sort of the musical and Pythagorean dimension of the Timaeus, through drawing on the commentary of Proclus. So I hope you can join us.
Sounds good. Thank you.
It was framed after the pattern of the eternal nature. Yeah. Right. So time and then the heaven. This is important, I think. Time then and the heaven came into being at the same instant. Right. That it's all instantaneous creation. In order that, having been created together, if ever there was to be a dissolution of them, then they might be dissolved together. It was framed after the pattern of the eternal nature, that it might resemble this as far as was possible. For the pattern exists from eternity, and the created heaven has been and is and will be in all time. Such was the mind and thought of God in the creation of time. The sun and moon and 5 other stars, which are called the planets. And here we have to remember that, when they're looking up at the heavens, right, the order, if I understand, I think it's, does anybody remember what's the correct order of the planets? That's like the sun and moon are supposed to be the closest, but then I think it might be, it's not our usual order. It's like the other planets that they thought of were Venus and Mercury and Jupiter and Saturn. I think I didn't say Mars, did I? So I think that, and I think that's all of the planets that they focused on in astronomy, astrology in that period. So the planets were created by him in order to distinguish and preserve the numbers of time. And when he had made their several bodies, he placed them in the orbits in which the circle of the other was revolving. In 7 orbits, 7 stars. First there was the moon in the orbit nearest the earth, and next the sun in the second orbit above the earth. Then came the morning star and the star sacred to Hermes, moving in orbits which have an equal swiftness with the sun, but in an opposite direction. And this is the reason why the sun and Hermes and Lucifer overtake and are overtaken by each other. To enumerate the places which he assigned to the other stars and to give all the reasons why he assigned them. Although a secondary matter would give more trouble than the primary. These things at some future time when we are at leisure may have the consideration which they deserve, but not at present. Now when all the stars which were necessary to the creation of time had attained a motion suitable to them, and had become living creatures having bodies fastened by vital chains, which is how they saw the stars, of which the planets are stars in this way of thinking. And so they're alive and their intelligences. And learned their appointed task, moving in the motion of the unit of the diverse, which is diagonal, and passes through and is governed by the motion of the same. They revolved, some in a larger and some in a lesser orbit. Those which had the lesser orbit revolving faster, and those which had the larger more slowly. Now by reason of the motion of the same, those which revolved fastest appeared to be overtaken by those which moved slower, although they really overtook them, for the motion of the same made them all turn in a spiral. And because some went one way and some another, that which receded most slowly from the sphere of the same, which was the swiftest, appeared to follow it most nearly, that there might be some visible measure of their relative swiftness and slowness as they proceeded in their 8 courses. God lighted a fire, which we now call the sun, in the second from the earth of these orbits, that it might give light to the whole of heaven, and that the animals, as many as nature intended, might participate in number, learning arithmetic from the revolution of the same and the like. This is important because there's this view that the heavens, these stars of the heavens are our teachers, right? And I think this is actually even historically true, that people by gazing skyward, right? They discern principles of nature. That this was really pivotal in sort of the development of, I think of the Babylonians, I think were among the earliest, but and also it reminds me of this thing I was hearing. I'm trying to remember what it was that made me think of it, but it's like we can also think of other animals in nature as our teachers, right? I mean that like we learn from the birds, right? Or different animals, right? And this also is, I think, historic. It has been substantiated, like that. But by imitating things that other forms of life did, we learned how to do it ourselves. I'm sure there's a good example, like from natural science, of humans like looking at, I don't know, like like wolves or bears or birds, or I mean, I guess looking at birds is very traditional with like augury, but I don't know, man, let's say you watch a beaver building a dam, and then you start thinking, I'm sure that's, but so in this way of thinking, I guess all of these animals would be there in order to teach us, including the animals that are the stars. So that the animals, as many as nature intended, might participate in number. And that's an interesting, it tells us that not number is a richer, more qualitative thing in how they conceive of number. If there's kind of a participatory encounter with number. Thus then, and for this reason, the night and the day were created, being the period of the one most intelligent revolution. And the month is accomplished when the moon has completed her orbit and overtaken the sun, and the year when the sun has completed his own orbit. Mankind, with hardly an exception, have not remarked the periods of the other stars, and they have no name for them, do not measure them against one another by the help of number. Hence, they can scarcely be said to know that their wanderings, being infinite in number and admirable for their variety, make up time. And yet, there is no difficulty in seeing that the perfect number of time fulfills the perfect year when all the 8 revolutions, having their relative degrees of swiftness, are accomplished together and attain their completion at the same time, measured by the rotation of the same and equally moving. After this manner, and for these reasons, came into being such of the stars as in their heavenly progress received reversals of motion, to the end that the created heaven might imitate the eternal nature and be as like as possible to the perfect and intelligible animal. Thus far, and until the birth of time, the created universe was made in the likeness of the original. But inasmuch as all animals were not yet comprehended therein, it was still unlike. What remained, the Creator then proceeded to fashion after the nature of the pattern. Now, as in the ideal animal, the mind perceives ideas or species of a certain nature and number. He thought that this created animal ought to have species of a like nature and number. There are 4 such. This is interesting, this kind of fourfold division of creatures. One of them is the heavenly race of the gods, another the race of birds whose way is in the air, the third the watery species, and the fourth the pedestrian and land creatures. And I wondered if when he says heavenly, right, because heavenly is kind of fiery, right? Right, so then, because then you would have fire, air, water, and earth, right? I mean, we think of the sort of the seraphic fire of the angels in the heavens, and presumably, right, when you think, if you think of the stars and the planets as fiery in that sense of Of the heavenly and divine, he created the greater part out of fire, that they might be the brightest of all things and fairest to behold. And he fashioned them after the likeness of the universe in the figure of a circle, and made them follow the intelligent motion of the Supreme, distributing them over the whole circumference of heaven, which was to be a true cosmos, or glorious world spangled with them all over. And he gave to each of them two movements. The first, a movement on the same spot after the same manner, whereby they ever continue to think consistently the same thoughts about the same things. The second, a forward movement, in which they are controlled by the revolution of the same and the like. But by the other five motions, they were unaffected, in order that each of them might attain the highest perfection. And for this reason, the fixed stars were created, to be divine and eternal animals, ever abiding, and revolving after the same manner and on the same spot. And the other stars, which reverse their motion and are subject to deviations of this kind, were created in the manner already described. The earth, which is our nurse, clinging around the pole, which is extended through the universe, he framed to be the guardian and artificer of night and day, first and eldest of gods that are in the interior of heaven. Vain would be the attempt to tell all the figures of them circling as in dance, and their juxtapositions and the return of them in their revolutions upon themselves and their approximations, and to say which of these deities in their conjunctions meet and which of them are in opposition, and in what order they get behind and before one another, and when they are severally eclipsed to our sight and again reappear, sending terrors and intimations of the future to those who cannot calculate their movements. To attempt to tell of all this without a visible representation of the heavenly system would be labor and in vain. Would be labor in vain. Enough on this head. And now let what we have said about the nature of the created invisible gods have an end. And he's about to talk about other gods. Right, he's going to talk about to know or tell the origin of the other divinities is beyond us. We must accept the traditions of the men of old time, who affirm themselves to be the offspring of the gods. That is what they say, and they must surely have known their own ancestors. How can we doubt the word of the children of the gods? Although they give no probable or certain proof, still, as they declare that they are speaking of what took place in their own family, we must conform to custom and believe them. In this manner, then, according to them, the genealogy of these gods is to be received and set forth. I think that's a very common thing in different cultures to attribute sort of, there's like the gods and then the first humans kind of descend from them in some way, like great men who are progenitors of civilizations are the offspring of gods. I think that's like a number of different cultures have maintained that. Yeah, Oceanus and Tethys were the children of earth and heaven, and from these sprang I'm going to mispronounce it.
Ryan.
Yeah.
You want me to keep reading? You've been reading for a while.
Oh, please. Yeah. Yes, you should. Yes.
I'm sorry. I should have cut you off earlier. Although I have a different edition, so.
That's all right. What translation do you have?
I have the one in the complete works.
Nice. Yeah.
I don't know who it's
So we're
by.
down at like should
Oh,
be
no,
41, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm up.
Good.
I'm up to. It's by Donald J. Zile.
Hmm.
I don't know. It's from this, the complete works. So Earth and Heaven gave birth to Ocean and Tethys, who in turn gave birth to Phorcys, Cronus, and Rhea, and all the gods in that generation. Cronus and Rhea gave birth to Zeus and Hera. as well as all those siblings who are called by names we know. These in turn gave birth to yet another generation. In any case, when all the gods had come to be, both the ones who make their rounds conspicuously and the ones who present themselves only to the extent that they are willing, the begetter of this universe spoke to them. This is what he said. O gods, works divine, whose maker and father I am, whatever has come to be by my hands cannot be undone but by my consent. I suppose that's sort of an allusion to what I brought up earlier about the unity, multiplicity, unity, but maybe. Now, while it is true that anything that is bound is liable to being undone, still only one who is evil would consent to the undoing of what has been well fitted together and is in fine condition. This is the reason why you, as creatures that have come to be, are neither completely immortal nor exempt from being undone. Still, you will not be undone, nor will death be your portion, since you have received the guarantee of my will, a greater, more sovereign bond than those with which you were bound when you came to be. Learn now, therefore, what I declare to you. There remain still three kinds of mortal beings that have not yet been begotten. And as long as they have not come to be, the universe will be incomplete, for it will still lack within it all the kinds of living things it must have if it is to be sufficiently complete. But if these creatures came to be and came to share in life by my hand, they would rival the gods. It is you then who must turn yourselves to the task of fashioning these living things as your nature allows. This will assure their mortality, and this whole universe will really be a completed whole. Imitate the power I used in causing you to be, and to the extent that it is fitting for them to possess something that shares our name of immortal, something described as divine and ruling within those of them who always consent to follow after justice and after you, I shall begin by sowing that seed and then hand it over to you. The rest of the task is yours. Weave what is mortal to what is immortal, fashion and beget living things, give them food, cause them to grow, and when they perish, receive them back again. So I keep going, but that's the end of the speech. So presumably this is the demiurge, right? Addressing the gods. Is it? Maybe I'm off.
Yes,
there.
I think so.
Anyway, so he hands over the task of fashioning these remaining beings. So so I'll keep reading. This is a 41D. When he
Just notice, note that doesn't that sound when it says, on the other hand, if they were created by me and received life at my hands, they would be on an equality with the gods. That sounds like in Genesis, right? They will become like us.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's very interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if when eventually we get to kind of the hexameral literature, when they're reading Genesis next to Timaeus, they probably would. We'll see if I think that would be a matter for reflection. But yeah, please go ahead.
When he had finished his speech, he turned again to the mixing bowl he had used before, the one in which he had blended and mixed the soul of the universe. He began to pour into it what remained of the previous ingredients and to mix them in somewhat the same way, though these were no longer invariably and constantly pure, but of a second and third grade of purity. And when he had compounded it all, he divided the mixture into a number of souls equal to the number of the stars, and assigned each soul to a star. He mounted each soul in a carriage, as it were, and showed it the nature of the universe. He described to them the laws that had been foreordained. They would all be assigned one and the same initial birth, so that none would be less well treated by him than any other. Then he would sow each of the souls into that instrument of time suitable to it, where they were to acquire the nature of being the most God-fearing of living things. And since humans have a twofold nature, the superior kind should be such as would from then on be called man. I suppose the twofold, the other part is what, woman? So once the souls were of necessity implanted in bodies, and these bodies had things coming to them and leaving them, the first innate capacity they would of necessity come to have would be sense perception, which arises out of forceful disturbances. This they all would have. The second would be love mingled with pleasure and pain, and they would come to have fear and spiritedness as well, plus whatever goes with having these emotions, as well as their natural opposites. And if they could master these emotions, their lives would be just, whereas if they were mastered by them, they would be unjust. And if a person lived a good life throughout the due course of his time, he would at the end return to his dwelling place in his companion star, to live a life of happiness that agreed with his character. But if he failed in this, he would be born a second time, now as a woman. The horror. And if even then he still could not refrain from wickedness, he would be changed once again, this time into some wild animal that resembled the wicked character he had acquired. And he would have no rest from these toilsome transformations until he had dragged that massive accretion of fire, water, air, earth into conformity with the revolution of the same and uniform within him, and so subdued that turbulent, irrational mass by means of reason. This would return him to his original condition of excellence. Continue. Having set out all of these ordinances to them, which he did to exempt himself from responsibility for any evil they may afterwards do, the god proceeded to sow some of them into the earth, some into the moon, and others into the various other instruments of time. After the sowing, he handed over to the young gods the task of weaving, make whatever else remained that the human soul still needed to have, plus whatever goes with those things. He gave them the task of ruling over these mortal living things and of giving them the finest, the best possible guidance they could give, without being responsible for any evil these creatures might bring upon themselves. When he had finished assigning all these tasks, he proceeded to abide at rest in his own customary nature. His children immediately began to attend to and obey their father's assignment. Now that they had received the immortal principle of the mortal living being, they began to imitate the craftsmen who had made them. They borrowed parts of fire, earth, water, and air from the world, intending to pay them back again, and bounded together into a unity the parts they have taken, but not with those indissoluble bonds by which they themselves were held together. Instead, they proceeded to fuse them together with copious rivets so small as to be invisible, thereby making each body a unit made up of all the components. And they went on to invest this body, into and out of which things were to flow, with the orbits of the immortal soul. These orbits, now bound within a mighty river, neither mastered that river nor were mastered by it, but tossed it violently and were violently tossed by it. Consequently, the living thing as a whole did indeed move, but it would proceed in a disorderly, random, and irrational way that involved all 6 of the motions. It would go forwards and backwards, then back and forth, to the right and to the left, upwards and downwards, wandering every which way in these 6 directions. For mighty as the nourishment-bearing billow was in its ebb and flow, mightier still was the turbulence produced by the disturbances caused by the things that struck against the living things. Such disturbances would occur when the body encountered and collided with external fire. In other words, the fire other than the body's own. Or for that matter, with a hard lump of earth, or with the flow of gliding waters, or when it was caught up by a surge of air-driven winds. The motions produced by all these encounters would then be conducted through the body to the soul and strike against it. That is no doubt why these motions as a group came afterward to be called sensations, as they are still called today. And then there's a footnote that says, in my edition, it says on why they're called sensations. It says, it is not clear what etymological point involving the word aesthesis, sensation, Plato wants to make here. Perhaps he thinks incorrectly that aesthesis is etymologically related to eisene, to shake. Anyway, so they cooperated. Let me see. I don't know what, I think it's the senses maybe. They cooperated with a continually flowing channel to stir and violently shake the orbits of the soul. They completely bound that of the same by flowing against it in the opposite direction and held it fast just as it was beginning to go its way. And they further shook the orbit of the different right through, with the result that they twisted every which way the 3 intervals of the double and the 3 of the triple, as well as the middle terms of the ratios 3 to 2, 4 to 3, and 9 to 8 that connect them. These agitations did not undo them, however, because they cannot be completely undone except by the one who had bound them together. They mutilated and disfigured the circles in every possible way, so the circles barely held together. and though they remained in motion, they moved without rhyme or reason, sometimes in the opposite direction, sometimes sideways, sometimes upside down, like a man upside down, head propped against the ground and holding his feet up against something. In that position, his right side will present itself both to him and to those looking at him as his left, and his left side as his right. It is this very thing, and others like it, that had such a dramatic effect upon the revolutions of the soul. Whenever they encounter something outside of them characterizable as same or different, they will speak of it as the same as something or as different from something else, when the truth is just the opposite, so proving themselves to be misled and unintelligent. Also, at this stage, souls do not have a ruling orbit taking the lead, and so when certain sensations come in from outside and attack them, they sweep the soul's entire vessel along with them. It is then that these revolutions, however much in control they seem to be, are actually under their control. All these disturbances are no doubt the reason why even today, and not only at the beginning, whenever a soul is bound within a mortal body, it at first lacks intelligence. But as a stream that brings growth and nourishment diminishes and the soul's orbits regain their composure, resume their proper courses and establish themselves more and more with the passage of time, the revolutions are set straight to conform to the configuration each of the circle takes in its own natural course. They then correctly identify what is the same and what is different, and render intelligent the persons who possess them. And to be sure, if such a person also gets proper nurture to supplement his education, he'll turn out perfectly whole and healthy, and will have escaped the most grievous of illnesses. But if he neglects this, he'll limp his way through life and return to Hades uninitiated and unintelligent. Let me keep going.
Yeah, I think so. I'm gonna. What could you tell me what they translate here? Because in this translation it says he attains the fullness and health of the perfect man. But how do they put it again?
This is right towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
About getting, okay, to be sure, if such a person also gets proper nurture to supplement his education, he'll turn out perfectly whole and healthy, and will have escaped the most grievous of illnesses.
Right, and I think you mentioned Hades, right? Which they
So the next
they call the world below.
Yeah, so he says, but if he neglects this, meaning this education or this nurture, he'll limp his way through life and return to Hades uninitiated and unintelligent.
So that's so I think this passage, and then remember that one before where it's talking how based on how you live, it impacts your next life.
Yeah.
Right, and it's actually like, this is actually, as you may notice, a somewhat different concept of I don't even know if I want to say reincarnation, like metempsychosis, in a way, because I mean, it does comprehend, it does seem that, like, if things went very much a certain direction, one could descend into kind of even a vegetable state of existence. I don't know if that seems to be implied here, but that is very interesting. But of course, I mean, somebody who doesn't believe in the doctrine of reincarnation per se, nevertheless could say that there's this intuition of, the way we live here does influence our condition, right, when we move on, right, and kind of there's a even, right, you could see somebody seeing, this, the world below or the world above, like doesn't he his native star, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy to see how those could be sort of probably what the medievals would say, right, is that because for them, there's an article about this that I hope to share at some point, but kind of, I mean, Pythagoras, of course, was much admired, but then he was considered the author of the, his big mistake is the transmigration of the soul, according to the medievals. Obviously, depending on one's perspective, that either is error or isn't. But yeah, no, I think well, we could continue if you want to. It's definitely very. I find this really fascinating and rich, and kind of there's you can just see kind of the way that these themes are going to be drawn upon by subsequent authors in the tradition.
Yeah, there is I don't know if it's completely parallel to it, but there's a general idea in Islam, and I mean it's not foreign, I think, to Christianity, but I think there's a hadith, and I'm wary of quoting them. I think I've told you that before, but there's something along the lines of that. A person will be with whom he loves in the afterlife. And so the idea being, I think it was in the context of the companions saying that, it might have been either closer to his death, but they were, or maybe it wasn't, but one of the companions came to the Prophet and said, basically like, we're all going to depart this life. We'll be reunited. And then as sort of comfort, the Prophet said, you will be with who you love in the afterlife. And I mean, you, in a very mundane way, you can basically say, like we even say in secular culture, like you can know, well, I don't know if we say it anymore, given our atomization, but you can know a lot about a person through who he associates with, right? So, not that that's reincarnation, but I think, yeah, there's definitely, there's something to be said for, I think, our desires and what we're, not just the pleasures, mundane pleasures, but what we're actually driven by, and not that determines. It's not like for example, in the ethos of Islam, there's obviously a big emphasis on just love of the Prophet, praising the Prophet, and there's almost, I think, an unspoken belief that will not be sufficient, but that is if your heart is directed towards the right object, and of course, love for the Prophet is love for God ultimately. That's that's the keystone. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I won't keep dragging Sahordi into this, but he talks about reincarnation. One place he's kind of open to it, another place he kind of condemns it. But he cites his source, at least from I think he says it's Eastern. I don't know if he pinpoints it to the Zoroastrians, but he said it was a doctrine of the ancient sages. Yeah, so there's a lot here. Also, does your text say does it say uninitiated after Hades?
Yeah, let's see. It says
because mine said he'll go back to, basically he'll return to Hades uninitiated, unintelligent.
so let me just try to. Yeah, but if mine says, but if he neglects education, he walks lame to the end of his life and returns imperfect and good for nothing to the world below.
That's quite different.
It is, yeah. No, and clearly those, yeah. That is interesting. Yeah, no, that and that, kind of that initiatory language, right? Of course, you think of the mysteries, right? Yeah, which is a way that Christians would think of Christian sacraments, and I would think that right, and of course in the Sufi tradition, kind of there's that initiatic dimension, but already in the Greek mysteries, right? Like initially the Eleusinian mysteries, right, and then other subsequent mysteries. You may have read something about the Eleusinian mysteries, but it's like people would go there and they were forbidden ever to write down what exactly it entailed, right? They could not. It was, and it's amazing. Like clearly they took it very seriously because we have no record of what they saw. We only know that what they saw liberated them from the fear of death, right? Whatever they encountered in that initiation set them at ease, and they were they knew that all would be right.
Yeah, maybe it was I don't know if Hercules is the one who actually crossed the Styx, right, and returned, if I'm not mistaken. Was it him?
I see. I need to bone up on my mythology clearly.
But I think, I mean, maybe they how did you phrase it? That they were relieved of their fear of death or something?
Yeah, they were. I think I said liberated from their fear of death.
Yeah, perhaps by encountering it and crossing over. I can't remember. I think it was either Hercules or one of, or I thought maybe it's Jason. But there's one of them who was, I think he's renowned for, although, okay, given their demigods, he was the mortal who had crossed over into the world of Hades and came back. And were they, see, now it's all a muddle. I can't remember if it's the Eleusinian or some other mystery cult, but in Sicily, it's actually the same text on Empedocles. He was theorizing that there are a lot of these mystery cults, or I don't know how he knows, but I think there are actually reports that they were in caves and caverns that were near Etna. And so he speculates, and I'm sure there's more work on this, that there was some chthonic underground, there's some aspect of descending into Hades and something related to that.
All right. Do you think of Orpheus?
Might be Orpheus. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there we go.
And there's this great book that.
Sorry,
Go
who's
ahead.
also a musician, right? Or did he have hymns? Did he have a harp, or is that somebody else? Orpheus. I thought it was. I thought he had, because Orpheus isn't he linked to Apollo?
Yes, there's so they're like, obviously, there was like the Apollonian and the Dionysian cults, and at Delphi, I believe it was, there was a certain portion of the year that was presided over Apollo, and then he would ascend to the land to the north of the Hyperboreans, and then during that period in the winter, Dionysius would be the god who would preside. And Orpheus was associated. It's interesting because Orpheus takes on some Dionysian qualities, and even though he's more associated with Apollo, and it also seems like the Orphic approach was, because the Dionysians were known for their wild, right, kind of divine frenzy, and like, I mean, I've heard the story like supposedly they would like get into their frenzy and they would like tear live animals limb from limb and like eat them. It's weird. They'd have like orgies and it would just be very wild. Whereas the Orphic, right, the Orphic cult was more ascetic, right, and they were reputed, I think, to be vegetarian even. In the kind of, there's that association with like Pythagorean vegetarianism subsequently. And, but the Orphic, because their idea was not, rather than to kind of give into this sort of frenzy and the bacchanal, which itself, obviously can be a modality of, because of course they're aiming not merely at sensual pleasure, right? They're aiming through that to transcend in some way to an apprehension of the divine vitality. But this one is more like that. It reminds me more of kind of the yogic outlook of sort of, right, disciplining oneself and overcoming the passions, and sort of I think I'd like to know more about sort of Orphism. There's like there's been some interesting scholarship recently where they kind of flesh out the picture in certain ways. I have this one book that on my shelf that I've been meaning to get to, and I hope to soon, because it's by this scholar called Tim Addy, but it's called the 7 Myths of the Soul. I think you might enjoy this. Because the 7 Myths of the Soul is based on a passage from Damascius, the last head of Plato's Academy in Athens. And he, so here's how he uses the figures, right? The soul descends into generation after the manner of Kori. She is scattered by generation after the matter of Dionysius. Like Prometheus and the Titans, she is bound to body. She frees herself by exercising the strength of Heracles. Gathers herself together through the help of Apollo. And the savior Athene by truly purifying philosophy. And she elevates herself to the causes of her being with Demeter. Right. So, and Kori is Persephone.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So Persephone, Dionysius, Prometheus, Heracles, Apollo, Athene, and Demeter. So it's kind of through these symbols, right? It's about the initiations and triumph of each human soul in quest of wisdom. So I think that's very interesting. Let's see. So where did we get to just now in the text?
Yeah, sorry about that. My neighbor wanted something.
Sure.
We got to 44C.
Right, so how is your voice? Do you feel?
Oh, I can keep reading. That's fine.
Sure.
Yeah, so I'll start from 44C.
Unless, I mean, Victor, you'd certainly be welcome to read a bit if you wanted to, but it's up to you.
I'm happy to, yeah, it's fine. Let me just get my text out.
What translation are you using?
The complete Plato is, I guess, two hands, so I'll just use that.
Great.
See, we were at 44.
If we had the same edition, it's 1247, using the complete.
Exactly, yeah. And let's see, we were down to the end of the paragraph, all right? So, but this doesn't happen until later.
Yep.
Our present subject, on the other hand, needs a more detailed treatment. We must move on to treat the prior questions, the ones that deal with how bodies came to be, part by part, as well as the soul. What were the gods' reasons? What was their plan when they caused these to be? In discussing these questions, we shall hold fast to what is most likely and proceed accordingly. Copying the revolving shape of the universe, the gods bound the two divine orbits into a ball-shaped body, the part that we now call our head. This is the most divine part of us and master of all our other parts. They then assembled the rest of the body and handed the whole of it to the head to be in its service. They intended it to share in all the motions there were to be, to keep the head from rolling around on the ground, without any way of getting up over its various high spots and out of the low. They gave it the body as a vehicle to make its way easy. This is the reason why the body came to have length and grow full limbs that could flex and extend themselves, divinely devised for the purpose of getting about. Holding on and supporting itself with these limbs, it would be capable of making its way through all regions while carrying at the top of the dwelling place of that most divine, most sacred part of ourselves. This is how, as well, as why we have all grown arms and legs, and considering the front side to be more honorable and more commanding than the back, the gods gave us the ability to travel for the most part in this direction. Human beings, no doubt, ought to have the front sides of their bodies distinguishable from and dissimilar to their backs, and so the gods began by setting the face from that side of the head, its soul's vessel. They bound organs inside it to provide completely for the soul, and they assign this side, the natural front, to be the part that takes the lead. The eyes were the first of the organs to be fashioned by the gods to conduct light. The reason why they fastened them within the head is this: they contrived that such fire as was not for burning, but for providing a gentle light, should become a body proper to each day. Now the pure fire inside is cousin to that fire they made to flow through the eyes. So they made the eyes, the eye as a whole, but its middle in particular, close, textured, smooth, and dense, to enable them to keep out all other coarser stuff and let that kind of fire pass through pure by itself. Now, whenever daylight surrounds the visual stream, like makes contact with like and coalesces with it, to make up a single homogeneous body aligned with the direction of the eyes. This happens wherever the internal fire strikes and presses against an external object it has connected with. And because this body of fire has become uniform throughout, and thus uniformly affected, it transmits the motions of whatever it comes in contact with, as well as whatever comes in contact with it, to and through the whole body until they reach the soul. This brings about the sensation we call seeing. At night, however, the kindred fire has departed, and so the visual stream is cut off. For now it exists only to encounter something unlike itself, no longer able to bond with the surrounding air, which now has lost its fire. It undergoes change and dies out. So it not only stops seeing, but even begins to induce sleep. For when the eyelids, which God devised to keep eyesight safe, are closed, they shut in the power of the internal fire, which then disperses and evens out the internal motions. And when these have been evened out, a state of quietness ensues. And if this quietness is deep, one falls into an all but dreamless sleep. But if some fairly strong motions remain, they produce images similar in kind and in number to the kind of motions they are and the kind of regions in which they remain, images which, though formed within, are recalled upon waking as external objects. So I guess I'm just it's considering eyes as the first of the sense organs, I guess, and connecting it with fire as a primary element in some way.
It is interesting, yeah. So he's, yeah, and in that sense, vision. That's why vision is the dominant sense, I suppose, in his presentation.
Then, yeah,
It's sort of like, right, like because of the elements, right. Fire is the most exalted, and you know, so the eye is the most akin to the heavens, the celestial, and the I mean that it makes sense. Like you can already see, right, kind of why do we speak of the beatific vision, right?
yeah,
Why is it vision? Why is it not audition, right? I mean obviously there is also a way that hearing, I mean hearing has a very, like hearing the voice of God or hearing sort of the harmony of the spheres, and that's also an important, but clearly the visual here has that special affinity with fire and light, and
interesting to hear. When I get to music, how that interplays with.
absolutely, yeah.
I was also just gonna add, I mean, don't want to become a meme with sorority, but that section I had read earlier on about the music of the spheres, he says that the sound that we hear in this world is through the material world, is through, I guess the compression of air and, interaction with the ear. But he calls it, I mean, the Arabic is surah, which just means, it can mean picture, it can mean image, it can mean form even technically. But he says that the music isn't, that the sound that we hear here, I assume music we hear in this world is an image of the music of the heavenly sphere. So it seems like maybe it's because he just had a special place for, I mean, vision is really the cornerstone of psychology, but it seems like if I can say this, the senses, even in this material world, can be translated back to their, I don't want to say origin, but back to the primary sense of, the primary mode of apprehension or sensation, which would be vision. I don't know if I thought I read somewhere, I mean, although I probably know the least about this, I thought I read that in some Christian mystical, for lack of better term, writings as well. But if I can't,
that make a lot of sense there, because there is a long tradition of the spiritual senses.
Yeah, but are they rooted? Are they kind of rooted? Are the other senses kind of spiritual or physical, sort of ordered under vision? If that makes sense.
Yes, and I think that is a common conception. I mean, there is also, though, right, maybe this has a very different provenance, right? But I know that in Christian mysticism, often taste. Well, I mean, right, like in the Islamic tradition, one speaks of Valk, right?
So yeah, it's there, definitely, yeah.
Yep. But as and that's related, right, to because actually, sapiencia, wisdom, right? Sapere is etymologically to taste.
Yes.
Right.
So savor would come from that, right?
Yes.
The word
yes.
savor.
Exactly. So like someone like John of the Cross will speak of la vida sabrosa, right? The savory life, the life of tasting, which is also that life of wisdom, which I guess suggests that more direct apprehension, right? Because there's I guess taste being just very immediate.
Yeah, and the last thing I'd say is when I studied some Plotinus with my teacher, and I don't know if this is really in Plato, although I suppose it must be, but that seeing is not, as we tend to think of it, as a type of, well, it is and it isn't. It is a sort of action at distance or activity at distance, but my teacher would really emphasize, and it's sort of a blockhead because I really didn't get it, and I still can't say I do completely, but he kept telling me, he's like, yeah, it's contact. Vision is a type of contact. There's an intimacy. There's a type of unity. It's not just this image kind of floating towards you from afar. Especially when it goes into, I mean, maybe you can really, if you want to squeeze it materially, you can make that case, but you said definitely in terms of intellectual modes of vision, it's a type of intimacy, it's a type of, anyway, and then I could go on a long,
no, for sure,
unhinged talk about my musings on Eros, but it's all Eros is a type of, at least in one way, desire for contact, for unity. But anyway, yeah, I think it's
that's from here, right? Now, when everyday light surrounds the visual stream, light makes contact with light, coalesces with it, a simple homogeneous body. Yeah.
Definitely, and the and even I think it becomes to be well known through Aristotle too that when you know something, you're not merely creating some representation of it in your mind, but there's a real conjunction of knower with known. Yeah. Which is why, right, like mystics who sought union with the active, or is it the agent intellect? Maybe those are synonyms, like the people like gosh, so so I'm just trying to think of there's a do you know who he's like the guy? Oh, Abraham Abulafia. Yes, was an ecstatic Kabbalist who basically drew on precisely that kind of Aristotelian epistemology or gnoseology, and he was a very enthusiastic reader of Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed, but he sought to really realize that in a more experiential way through meditative practices and through kind of actually he would, well, that's its whole other topic which we can get into, but kind of through the mysticism of the letters, of the Hebrew letters. Would you like to?
Sorry, to throw in one last parallel.
Yes.
Although I am rusty. In Timaeus, he has this, I think it's actually in Aeneid 5:1. I was reading it recently, but when he talks about the formation of the intellect or the coming to be of the hypothesis of the intellect, he says, he describes it in one place as seeing, it is seeing that seeking sight. I think seeking sight. And that, it relates to the Phaedrus in some way, in the sense that, I think, doesn't he say in the Phaedrus that the soul gives birth in beauty? Anyway, yeah. So they are linked. But my point was that the intellect as a type of unseeing sight, I think, or unformed sight when it extends, if you will. I mean, this is eternally, and it's a type of dynamic that's constantly going on. But if you were to analyze it into parts, there's a type of extension, procession, and then in its desire for union with the one, it turns back. But in turning back, there's there can't be, I think, that turning back in itself is productive of the forms, which are I guess if you want to push it, I mean, I don't think Plotinus says this explicitly, but each form is a sort of, I guess you could say, an image of the one. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's pushing it. I don't know if there can be an image of the one, but there's a kind of coming forth of diversity from that. That kind of endless productive tension of trying to unify, which I think at the end is a sort of contact. I think you could describe it as.
Great. So would you like to continue?
Yeah, you want me to keep going,
or I mean, either of you, whoever would like to.
Well, I mean, I can go for the next paragraph if you want.
All right.
Or go ahead.
Sorry, where were we? Let us conclude. No.
We were at 46b, and so there's no longer any difficulty, I think, on 249.
Oh, yeah. And so there is no longer any difficulty in understanding how images are produced in mirrors or in any other smooth reflecting surface. On such occasions, the internal fire joins forces with the external fire to form on the smooth surface a single fire, which is reshaped in a multitude of ways. So once the fire from the face comes to coalesce with the fire from sight on the smooth and bright surface, you have the inevitable appearance of all images of this sort. What is left will appear as right, because the parts of the fire from sight connect with the opposite parts of the fire from the face, contrary to the usual manner of encounter. But on the other hand, what is right does appear as right, and what is left whenever light switches sides in the process of coalescing with the light with which it coalesces. And this happens whenever the mirror's smooth surface is curled upwards on both sides, thereby bending the right part of the fire from sight towards the left and the left part towards the right. And when the same smooth surface is turned along the length of the face, i.e. vertically, it makes the whole object appear upside down, because it bends the lower part of the ray towards the top and the upper part towards the bottom. Right, I could go one more paragraph. Now, all of the above are among the auxiliary causes employed in the service of the god, as he does his utmost to bring to completion the character of what is most excellent. But because they make things cold or hot, compact or disperse them, and produce all sorts of similar effects, most people regard them not as auxiliary causes, but as the actual causes of all things. Things like these, however, are totally incapable of possessing any reason or understanding about anything. We must pronounce the soul to be the only thing there is that properly possesses understanding. The soul is an invisible thing, whereas fire, water, earth, and air have all come to be as visible bodies. So anyone who is a lover of understanding and knowledge must of necessity pursue as primary causes those that belong to intelligent nature, and as secondary all those that belong to things that are moved by others and that set still others in motion by necessity. We too surely must do likewise. We must describe both types of causes, distinguishing those which possess understanding and thus fashion what is beautiful and good from those which, when deserted by intelligence, produce only haphazard and disorderly effects every time.
Yes. It's very interesting to see some of the subtle differences in the translations. Yeah, both kinds of causes should be acknowledged by us, but a distinction should be made between those which are endowed with mind and are the workers of things, fair and good, and those which are deprived of intelligence and always produce chance effects without order or design. I'll just continue for a little bit. Of the second or cooperative causes of sight, which help to give to the eyes the power which they now possess, enough has been said. I will therefore now proceed to speak of the higher use and purpose for which God has given them to us. The sight, in my opinion, is the source of the greatest benefit to us, for had we never seen the stars and the sun and the heaven, none of the words which we have spoken about the universe would ever have been uttered. But now, the sight of day and night and the months and the revolutions of the years have created number and have given us a conception of time and the power of inquiring about the nature of the universe. And from this source, we have derived philosophy, than which no greater good ever was or will be given by the gods to mortal man. This is the greatest boon of sight. And of the lesser benefits, why should I speak? Even the ordinary man, if he were deprived of them, would bewail his loss, but in vain. Thus much let me say, however, God invented and gave us sight to the end that we might behold the courses of intelligence in the heaven, and apply them to the courses of our own intelligence, which are akin to them, the unperturbed to the perturbed, and that we, learning them and partaking of the natural truth of reason, might imitate the absolutely unerring courses of God and regulate our own vagaries. The same may be affirmed of speech and hearing. They have been given by the gods to the same end and for a like reason. For this is the principal end of speech, whereto it most contributes. Moreover, so much of music as is adapted to the sound of the voice and to the sense of hearing is granted to us for the sake of harmony. And harmony, which has motions akin to the revolutions of our souls, is not regarded by the intelligent votary of the muses as given by them with a view to irrational pleasure, which is deemed to be the purpose of it in our day, but as meant to correct any discord which may have arisen in the courses of the soul, and to be our ally in bringing her into harmony and agreement with herself. And rhythm too was given by them for the same reason, on account of the irregular and graceless ways which prevail among mankind generally, and to help us against them. Were there any differences in your translation that you thought might bring out a different aspect to that?
It's pretty similar.
Yeah. We have our sight so that we can, it's really to guide us to philosophy and the inquiry into the nature of the universe, which he says no greater good, right, ever was or will be given by gods to mortal man. Yeah, and there's this analogy between the courses of intelligence in the heaven and the courses of our own intelligence. So there's this correspondence between, I guess it's, you could speak of the correspondence between the microcosm and the macrocosm, right? So that's very very interesting. Thus far in what we have been saying, with small exception, the works of intelligence have been set forth. And now we must place by the side of them in our discourse the things which come into being through necessity. For the creation is mixed, being made up of necessity and mind. Mind, the ruling power, persuaded necessity to bring the greater part of created things to perfection. And thus, and after this manner in the beginning, when the influence of reason got the better of necessity, the universe was created. But if a person will truly tell of the way in which the work was accomplished, he must include the other influence of the variable cause as well. Wherefore, we must return again and find another suitable beginning, as about the former matters, so also about these. To which end we must consider the nature of fire and water and air and earth, such as they were prior to the creation of the heaven, and what was happening to them in this previous state. For no one has as yet explained the manner of their generation, but we speak of fire and the rest of them, whatever they mean, as though men knew their natures, and we maintain them to be the first principles and letters or elements of the whole, when they cannot reasonably be compared by a man of any sense even to syllables or first compounds. And let me say thus much: I will not now speak of the first principle or principles of all things, or by whatever name they are to be called, for this reason, because it is difficult to set forth my opinion according to the method of discussion which we are at present employing. Do not imagine any more than I can bring myself to imagine that I should be right in undertaking so great and difficult a task. Remembering what I said at first about probability, I will do my best to give as probable an explanation as any other, or rather more probable. And I will first go back to the beginning and try to speak of each thing and of all. Once more then, at the commencement of my discourse, I call upon God and beg him to be our savior out of a strange and unwanted inquiry, and to bring us to the haven of probability. So now let us begin again. I love it. So it's like it begins again.
Yeah, he does say in this edition that how did he characterize necessity? It was towards the beginning. So he said here, which I think, I don't know, the way your edition made me think of something quite different. But he said, so if I'm to tell, so this is 48a. So if I'm to tell a story of how it really came to be in this way, I'll also have to introduce the character of the straying cause, how it is its nature to set things adrift. And yours was what, like variability or something?
Wait, so can you?
Yeah, so it's okay. So he brings up intellect and necessity, right? And he talks about intellect prevailing over, or what was it? Ruling over.
Yes, mind the ruling power persuaded necessity to bring the greater part of created things to perfection.
Yeah, and then okay, so what's the next sentence?
But if a person will truly tell of the way in which the work was accomplished, he must include the other influence of the variable cause as well.
Yeah, so here it says, if he's gonna tell, basically, if I'm to tell a story of how it really came to be in this way, I'd also have to introduce the character of the straying cause, how it is its nature to set things adrift. Which, I don't know, to me has more of a, like, I guess, chaotic connotation. So that's interesting.
This new beginning of our discussion of the universe requires a fuller division than the former. For then we made two classes. Now a third must be revealed. The two sufficed for the former discussion. One, which we assumed was a pattern intelligible and always the same. And the second was only the imitation of the pattern, generated and visible. So we have the invisible and the visible, which, that reminds me of liturgically one speaks of the creator of all things visible and invisible. And I think in Islam, there's sort of the unseen and the seen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But then what's this third? He says there is also a third kind which we did not distinguish at the time, conceiving that the two would be enough. But now the argument seems to require that we should set forth in words another kind, which is difficult of explanation and dimly seen. What nature are we to attribute to this new kind of being? We reply, that it is the receptacle, and in a manner the nurse of all generation. I think this would be the Korah, or the womb of all. It's not. The receptacle, and in a manner the nurse of all generation. I have spoken the truth, but I must express myself in clearer language, and this will be an arduous task for many reasons. And in particular, because I must first raise questions concerning fire and the other elements and determine what each of them is. For to say with any probability or certitude which of them should be called water rather than fire, and which should be called any of them rather than all or some one of them, is a difficult matter. How then shall we settle this point, and what questions about the elements may be fairly raised? In the first place, we see that what we just now called water, by condensation, I suppose, becomes stone and earth. And this same element, when melted and dispersed, passes into vapor and air. Air again, and this is very interesting, the transformation of the elements into each other. Air, again, when inflamed, becomes fire. And again, fire, when condensed and extinguished, passes once more into the form of air. And once more, air, when collected and condensed, produces cloud and mist. And from these, when still more compressed, comes flowing water. And from water comes earth and stones once more. And thus generation appears to be transmitted from one to the other in a circle. Thus then, as the several elements never present themselves in the same form, how can anyone have the assurance to assert positively that any of them, whatever it may be, is one thing rather than another? No one can, but much the safest plan is to speak of them as follows. Anything which we see to be continually changing, as for example, fire, we must not call this or that, but rather say that it is of such a nature. Nor let us speak of water as this, but always as such. Nor must we imply that there is any stability in any of those things, which we indicate by the use of the words this and that, supposing ourselves to signify something thereby. For they are too volatile to be detained in any such expressions as this or that, or relative to this, or any other mode of speaking which represents them as permanent. We ought not to apply this to any of them, but rather the word such, which expresses the similar principle circulating in each and all of them. For example, that should be called fire, which is of such a nature always, and so of everything that has generation. That in which the elements severally grow up and appear and decay is alone to be called by the name this or that. But that which is of a certain nature, hot or white or anything which admits of opposite qualities, and all things that are compounded of them, ought not to be so denominated. Let me make another attempt to explain my meaning more clearly. Suppose a person to make all kinds of figures of gold and to be always transmuting them one form into all the rest. Somebody points to one of them and asks what it is. By far the safest and truest answer is that is gold, and not to call the triangle or any other figures which are formed in the gold these, as though they had existence, since they are in process of change while he is making the assertion. But if the questioner be willing to take the safe and indefinite expression such, we should be satisfied. And the same argument applies to the universal nature which receives all bodies. That must be always called the same, for while receiving all things, she never departs at all from her own nature. and never in any way or at any time assumes a form like that of any of the things which enter into her. She is the natural recipient of all impressions, and is stirred and informed by them, and appears different from time to time by reason of them. But the forms which enter into and go out of her are the likenesses of real existences, modeled after their patterns in a wonderful and inexplicable manner, which we will hereafter investigate. For the present, we have only to conceive of three natures. First, that which is in process of generation. Secondly, that in which the generation takes place. And thirdly, that of which the thing generated is a resemblance. And we may liken the receiving principle to a mother, and the source or spring to a father, and the intermediate nature to a child. And may remark further that if the model is to take every variety of form, then the matter in which the model is fashioned will not be duly prepared unless it is formless and free from the impress of any of those shapes which it is hereafter to receive from without. For if the matter were like any of the supervening forms, then whenever any opposite or entirely different nature was stamped upon its surface, it would take the impression badly, because it would intrude its own shape. Wherefore that which is to receive all forms should have no form. As in making perfumes, they first contrive that the liquid substance which is to receive the scent shall be as inodorous as possible. Or as those who wish to impress figures on soft substances do not allow any previous impression to remain, but begin by making the surface as even and smooth as possible. In the same way, that which is to receive perpetually and through its whole extent the resemblances of all eternal beings ought to be devoid of any particular form. Wherefore the mother and receptacle of all created and visible, and in any way sensible things, is not to be termed earth or air or fire or water, or any of their compounds, or any of the elements from which these are derived, but is an invisible and formless being, which receives all things, and in some mysterious way partakes of the intelligible, and is most incomprehensible. In saying this, we shall not be far wrong. As far, however, as we can attain to a knowledge of her from the previous considerations, we may truly say that fire is that part of her nature which from time to time is inflamed, and water that which is moistened, and that the mother substance becomes earth and air, insofar as she receives the impressions of them.
Yeah, I was going to say that they're about maybe a paragraph up. Let me see, 50E. So what you had was a little bit different. It was right before where he talks about ointments. So I don't know if this makes sense. For if it remembered any of the things that enter it, it's about the, you know, the mother hive with the, what is this, the receptacle, I suppose, right? It can't resemble anything. So it says, for if it resembled any of these things that enter it, it could not successfully copy their opposites, or things of a totally different nature whenever it were to receive them. And then he says it would be showing its own face as well, which I thought is, I don't know, a little more poetic, but pretty interesting. There's a couple verses that Sufis like to use that, you know, in the Quran, that where it's something like, and in whichever direction you turn or they turn, there is the face of God. So I don't know. I don't know what to say about that, but
No, sure.
I wonder what the Greeks like.
Talking about the Sufi parallels, that image he uses about gold and the different shapes of gold is also a kind of a standard Al-Arabi kind of monist kind of metaphor, right?
Yeah, no, I'm sure. I mean, I'm no expert, but I wouldn't be surprised.
It's also I think very well known in kind of in the Indian tradition, in Vedanta and possibly other schools where, you know, they talk about the gold and the ornaments made of gold, right? So they say, right, just as, and I think it's used to illustrate sort of the underlying unity of all things, right? That, by shaping those ornaments, right, it doesn't change the fact that it's all gold. And so I think he's getting at, I'm curious what this sort of the this and the that and the such, like how did he translate those terms in your translation? Because of course he's saying that well, go ahead. The
well, 49D. So you asked that kind of question, the rhetorical question, how can somebody without embarrassment say that it's this one, not something else? So he says one can't. Rather, the safest course by far is to propose that we speak about these things in the following way. What we invariably observe becoming different at different times, fire, for example, to characterize that, i.e. fire, not as this, in quotations, but each time as what is such. And speak of water not as this, but always as what is such. Yeah, that seems like what he's using. What is such in all those places.
It's just sort of the, Heraclitean kind of notion, or Buddhist kind of notion, right? Yeah. Flow.
Yeah. Right. And yeah, I mean that which, right, you can't speak of it. I guess this is really illustrating another aspect of analogous predication, right? Or like it's not, right, we're not speaking, yeah, no, we're yeah, because we recognize that to really say it is, right, that we'd be talking about eternally so, but we're really talking about it being such, as it's in flux, but we kind of see that analogously in it. Good, yeah. And so it's also, I mean, so this conception of like the receptacle, I mean, reminds me too of sort of in the yogic tradition where they speak of Purusha and Prakriti in a way. I mean, maybe not precisely. Not necessarily, but there, I guess, kind of a primordial nature that anyway, I mean, that's obviously a very, there's a lot of debates and discussions about exactly how to best to understand Korah. So he says, let us consider this question more precisely. Is there any self-existent fire? And do all those things which we call self-existent exist? Or are only those things which we see or in some way perceived through the bodily organs truly existent and nothing whatever besides them? And is all that which we call an intelligible essence nothing at all and only a name? Here is a question which we must not leave unexamined or undetermined, nor must we affirm too confidently that there can be no decision. Neither must we interpolate in our present long discourse a digression equally long, but If it is possible to set forth a great principle in a few words, that is just what we want. Thus I state my view. If mind and true opinion are two distinct classes, then I say that there certainly are these self-existent ideas, unperceived by sense, and apprehended only by the mind. If, however, as some say, true opinion differs in no respect from mind, then everything that we perceive through the body is to be regarded as most real and certain. But we must affirm them to be distinct, for they have a distinct origin and are of a different nature. The one is implanted in us by instruction, the other by persuasion. The one is always accompanied by true reason, the other is without reason. The one cannot be overcome by persuasion, but the other can. And lastly, every man may be said to share in true opinion, but mind is the attribute of the gods and of very few men. Wherefore also we must acknowledge that there is one kind of being which is always the same, uncreated and indestructible, never receiving anything into itself from without, nor itself going out to any other, but invisible and imperceptible by any sense, and of which the contemplation is granted to intelligence only. And there is another nature of the same name with it, and like to it, perceived by sense, created, always in motion, becoming in place and again vanishing out of place, which is apprehended by opinion and sense. And there is a third nature, which is space, and is eternal, and admits not of destruction, and provides a home for all created things, and is apprehended without the help of sense, by a kind of spurious reason, and is hardly real, which we, beholding as in a dream, say of all existence that it must of necessity be in some place and occupy a space, but that what is neither in heaven nor in earth has no existence. Of these and other things of the same kind, relating to the true and waking reality of nature, we have only this dreamlike sense, and we are unable to cast off sleep and determine the truth about them. For an image, since the reality after which it is modeled does not belong to it, and it exists ever as the fleeting shadow of some other, must be inferred to be in another, i.e. in space, grasping existence in some way or another, or other. Or it could not be at all, but true and exact reason, vindicating the nature of true being, maintains that while two things, i.e. the image and space, are different, they cannot exist, one of them in the other, and so be one and also two at the same time. Thus have I concisely given the result of my thoughts, and my verdict is that being and space and generation, these three existed in their three ways before the heaven, and that the nurse of generation, moistened by water and inflamed by fire and receiving the forms of earth and air, and experiencing all the affections which accompany these, presented a strange variety of appearances, and being full of powers which were neither similar nor equally balanced, was never in any part in a state of equipoise, but swaying unevenly hither and thither, was shaken by them, and by its motion again shook them. And the elements, when moved, were separated and carried continually, some one way, some another, as when grain is shaken and winnowed by fans and other instruments used in the threshing of corn. The close and heavy particles were borne away and settle in one direction, and the loose and light particles in another. In this manner, the four kinds or elements were then shaken by the receiving vessel, which, moving like a winnowing machine, scattered far away from one another the elements most unlike, and forced the most similar elements into close contact. Wherefore also the various elements had different places before they were arranged so as to form the universe. At first they were all without reason and measure. But when the world began to get into order, fire and water and earth and air had only certain faint traces of themselves, and were altogether such as everything might be expected to be in the absence of God. This, I say, was their nature at that time, and God fashioned them by form and number. Let it be consistently maintained by us in all that we say, that God made them as far as possible the fairest and best, out of things which were not fair and good. And now I will endeavor to show you the disposition and generation of them by an unaccustomed argument which I am compelled to use. But I believe that you will be able to follow me, for your education has made you familiar with the methods of science. Would you like to continue, Victor?
Sure. First of all, everyone knows, I'm sure, that fire, earth, water, and air are bodies. Now, everything that has bodily form also has depth. Depth, moreover, is of necessity comprehended within surface, and any surface bounded by straight lines is composed of triangles. Every triangle, moreover, derives from two triangles, each of which has one right angle and two acute angles. Of these two triangles, one, the isosceles right angle triangle, has at each of the other two vertices an equal part of a right angle, determined by its division by equal sides, while the other, the scalene right angle triangle, has unequal parts of a right angle at its other two vertices, determined by the division of the right angle by unequal sides. This then we presume to be the originating principle of fire, and of the other bodies, as we pursue our likely account in terms of a necessity. Principles yet more ultimate than these are known only to the God, and to any man he may hold dear. So he derives the principle of fire from this triangle division. Interesting.
Yes, that is interesting. Yeah, and also you say any man he may hold dear, and the other, and here he has and he of man who is the friend of God.
Oh, right.
Yeah, which is interesting.
We
and of
should
course
now.
that. Go,
No,
yeah,
I
go
was just
ahead,
gonna-
please.
Did-
Yeah,
to say or no?
sure. Go ahead.
I was just going to continue reading, right? Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
We should say which are the most excellent four bodies that can come to be. They are quite unlike each other, though some of them are capable of breaking up and turning into others and vice versa. If our account is on the mark, we shall have the truth about how earth and fire and their proportionate intermediates, water and air, came to be. For we shall never concede to anyone that there are any visible bodies more excellent than these, each conforming to a single kind. So we must wholeheartedly proceed to fit together the four kinds of bodies of surpassing excellence, and to declare that we have come to grasp natures well enough. Of the two right-angled triangles, the isosceles has but one nature, while the scalene has infinitely many. Now we have to select the most excellent one from among the infinitely many if we are to get a proper start. So if anyone can say that he has picked out another one that is more excellent for the construction of these bodies, his victory will be that of a friend, not an enemy. Of the many scalene right-angled triangles, then we posit as the one most excellent, surpassing the others, that one from a pair of which this equilateral triangle is constructed as a third figure. Why this is so is too long a story to tell for now, but if anyone puts this claim to the test and discovers that it isn't so, his be the prize, with our congratulations. So much, then, for the selection of the two triangles out of which the bodies of fire and the other bodies are constructed, the right angle isosceles and the right angle scalene, whose longer side squared is always triple its shorter side squared, i.e. the half equilateral. At this point, we need to formulate more precisely something that was not stated clearly earlier, for then it appeared that all four kinds of bodies could turn into one another by successive stages. But the appearance is wrong. While there are indeed four kinds of bodies that come to be from the right-angled triangles we have selected, three of them come from triangles that have unequal sides, where the fourth alone is fashioned out of isosceles triangles. Thus, not all of them have the capacity of breaking up and turning into one another, with a large number of small bodies turning into a small number of large ones and vice versa. There are three that can do this, for all three are made up of a single type of triangle, so that when once the larger bodies are broken up, the same triangles can go on to make a large number of small bodies, assuming shapes appropriate to them. And likewise, when numerous small bodies are fragmented into their triangles, these triangles may well combine to make up some single massive body belonging to another kind. So much then for our account of how these bodies turned into one another. Let us next discuss the form that each of them has come to have and the various numbers that have combined to make them up. Leading the way will be the primary form, the tetrahedron, the tiniest structure whose elementary triangle is one whose hypotenuse is twice the length of its shorter side. Now, when a pair of such triangles are juxtaposed along the diagonal, i.e. their hypotenuses, and this is done 3 times, and their diagonals and short sides converge upon a single point as center, and the result is a single equilateral triangle composed of 6 such triangles. When 4 of these equilateral triangles are combined, a single solid angle is produced at the junction of 3 plane angles. This, it turns out, is the angle which comes right after the most obtuse of the plane angles. And once 4 such solid angles have been completed, we get the primary solid form, which is one that divides the entire circumference of the sphere in which it is inscribed into equal and similar parts. The second solid form, the octahedron, is constructed out of the same triangles, which, however, are now arranged in 8 equilateral triangles and produce a single solid out of 4 plane angles. And when 6 such solid angles have been produced, the second body has reached its completion. Now, the third body, the icosahedron, is made up of a combination of 120 of the elementary triangles and of 12 solid angles, each enclosed by 5 plane equilateral triangles. This body turns out to have 20 equilateral triangular faces. And let us take our leave of this one of the elementary triangles, the one that has begotten the above 3 kinds of bodies, and turn to the other one, the isosceles triangle, which has begotten the 4th, the cube. Arranged in sets of 4 whose right angles come together at the center, the isosceles triangle produced a single equilateral quadrangle, i.e. a square. And when 6 of these quadrangles were combined together, they produce 8 solid angles, each of which was constituted by 3 plane right angles. The shape of the resulting bodies were constructed as a cube, and it has 6 quadrangular equilateral faces. One other construction, a 5th, still remained, and this one the god used for the whole universe, embroidering figures on it. And the note is that it is the dodecahedron. Anyone following this whole line of reasoning might very well be puzzled about whether we should say that there are infinitely many worlds or a finite number of them. If so, he would have to conclude that to answer infinitely many is to take the view of one who is really unfinished in things he ought to be finished in. He would do better to stop with the question whether we should say that there is really just one world or 5 and be puzzled about that. Well, our probable answer declares there to be but one world, a god, though someone else taking other things into consideration will come to a different opinion. We must set him aside, however.
Do you want me to continue? I mean, you can.
Thinking, do we have time to stop, or are we just?
I mean, I think we can. I would say continue until like we feel like we come to a place that's like a good.
Okay. Okay.
Like whenever you get to a passage and you're like, I feel like there's this, like we've read a sense of closure app, having read that.
Okay.
Yeah, I can continue, but yeah, it looks like very soon he gets into the more nitty-gritty of like different the formation of different minerals and stuff. But anyway, all right, let us now assign to fire, earth, water, and air the structures which have just been given their formations in our speech. To earth, let us give the cube, because of the four kinds of bodies, earth is the most immobile and the most pliable, which is what the solid, whose faces are the most secure, must of necessity turn out to be, more so than the others. Now, of the right angled triangles we originally postulated, the face belonging to those that have equal sides has a greater natural stability than those belonging to triangles that have unequal sides. And the surface that is composed of the two triangles, the equilateral quadrangle being the square, holds its position with greater stability than does the equilateral triangle, both in their parts and as wholes. Hence, if we assign this solid figure to earth, we are preserving our likely account. And of the solid figures that are left, we shall next assign the least mobile of them to water, to fire the most mobile, and to air the one in between. This means that the tiniest body belongs to fire, the largest to water, and the intermediate one to air. And also that the body with the sharpest edges belongs to fire, the next sharpest to air, and the third sharpest to water. Now, in all of these cases, the body that has the fewest faces is of necessity the most mobile, in that it, more than any other, has edges that are the sharpest and best fit for cutting in every direction. It is also the lightest, in that it is made up of the least number of identical parts. The second body ranks second in having these same properties, and the third ranks third. So let us follow our account, which is not only likely, but also correct, and take the solid form of the pyramid that we saw constructed as the element or the seed of fire. And let us say that the second form in order of generation is that of air, and the third that of water. Now, we must think of all these bodies as being so small that due to their small size, none of them, whatever their kind, is visible to us individually. When, however, a large number of them are clustered together, we do see them in bulk. And in particular, as to the proportions among their numbers, their motions, and their other properties, we must think that when the god had brought them to complete and exact perfection, to the degree that necessity was willing to comply obediently, he arranged them together proportionately. And keep going, unless anyone has anything to say. Given all that we have said so far about the kinds of elemental bodies, the following account of their transformations is the most likely. When earth encounters fire and is broken up by fire's sharpness, it will drift about, whether the breaking up occurred within fire itself or within a mass of air or water. It'll drift about until its parts meet again somewhere, refit themselves together, and become earth again. The reason is that the parts of earth will never pass into another form. But when water is broken up into parts by fire or even by air, it could happen that these parts recombine to form one corpuscle of fire and two of air. And the fragments of air could produce from any single particle that is broken up two fire corpuscles. And conversely, whenever a small amount of fire is enveloped by a large quantity of air or water, or perhaps earth, and is agitated inside them as they move, and in spite of its resistance is beaten and shattered to bits, then any two fire corpuscles may combine to constitute a single form of air. And when air is overpowered and broken down, then 2 1/2 entire forms of air will be consolidated into a single entire form of water. Let us recapitulate and formulate our account of these transformations as follows. Whenever one of the other kinds is caught inside fire and gets cut up by the sharpness of fire's angles and edges, then if it is reconstituted as fire, it will stop getting cut. The reason is that a thing of any kind that is alike and uniform is incapable of affecting any change in, or being affected by, anything that is similar to it. But as long as something involved in a transformation has something stronger than it to contend with, the process of its dissolution will continue nonstop. And likewise, when a few of the smaller corpuscles are surrounded by a greater number of bigger ones, they will be shattered and quenched. The quenching will stop when these smaller bodies are willing to be reconstituted into the form of the kind that prevailed over them. And so from fire will come air, and from air water. But if these smaller corpuscles are in process of turning into these, and one of the other kinds encounters them and engages them in battle, their dissolution will go on nonstop until they are either completely, until they are either completely squeezed and broken apart and escape to their own likes, or else are defeated, and melding from many into one, they are assimilated to the kind that prevailed over them, and come to share its abode from then on. And what is more, as they undergo these processes, they all exchange their territories, for as a result of the receptacle's agitation, the masses of each of the kinds are separated from one another, with each occupying its own region. But because some parts of a particular kind do from time to time become unlike their former selves, and like the other kinds, they are carried by the shaking towards the region occupied by whatever masses they are becoming like to. I was sorry, I was just I was thinking about because it still puzzles me the inclusion of the Atlantis story at the beginning, and
Okay.
I think it's quite important. And actually, I didn't realize that the Critias is that what it is? That the next one?
Mhm.
'Cause I don't think I've read it. I was reading a little bit earlier today. It kind of continues that, but it's interesting that this transformation is warlike, cutting and taking over and broken apart and being assimilated. And then he talks about territories and being in its own region. Anyway, I don't know if there's any relation, but something I guess to bear in mind. Anyway, so I'll continue. So we're at 57C. These then are the sorts of causes by which the unalloyed primary bodies have come to be. Now, the fact that different varieties are found within their respective forms is to be attributed to the constructions of each of the elementary triangles. Each of these two constructions did not originally yield a triangle that had just one size, but triangles that were both smaller and larger, numerically as many as there are varieties within a given form. That is why when they are mixed with themselves and with each other, they display an infinite variety, which those who are to employ a likely account in their study of nature ought to take note of. And then he goes into motion. You want to keep going there?
Let's see.
Because I think from here on he starts talking about, the varieties of fire, varieties of, liquid and earth. And
Right. So, I mean, let's see. Do you feel like this is a good place to stop, or what do you think?
well, if we are to stop at a natural point, I mean, it goes on quite a bit for I'm willing to go on further, but because he really goes, I mean, the next natural spot would be probably, I would guess, all the way 68E, maybe, after he goes through all the
Yeah, no,
different. It's up to you guys. I don't. Tomorrow's the day off.
I mean, I'm probably going to have to go in a little bit. I can stay a little bit longer, but
Right. I'm just trying to identify. So you say 60, right? So.
Yeah, 68 or around there.
Yeah. Oh yeah, if you'd like to go on, we could go on until that stopping place. I think if you're feeling it.
Yeah, I'd be willing. I mean, I can keep going for a little bit. I mean, I can keep reading if you guys
Sure.
want.
Please.
Okay, so 57, 57D or E. All right, so now as for motion and rest, unless there is agreement on the manner and the conditions in which these two come to be, we will have many obstacles to face in our subsequent course of reasoning. Although we have already said something about them, we need to say this as well. There will be no motion in a state of uniformity, for it is difficult or rather impossible for something to be moved without something to set it in motion, or something to set a thing in motion without something to be moved by it. When either is absent, there is no motion, but when they are present, it is quite impossible for them to be uniform. And so let us always presume that rest is found in a state of uniformity, and to attribute motion to non-uniformity. The latter, moreover, is caused by inequality, the origin of which we have already discussed. We have not explained, however, how it is that the various corpuscles have not reached the point of being thoroughly separated from each other, kind by kind, so that their transformations into each other and their movements towards their own region would have come to a halt. So let us return to say this about it. Once the circumference of the universe has comprehended by the four kinds, then because it is round and has a natural tendency to gather in upon itself, it constricts them all and allows no empty space to be left over. This is why fire, more than the other three, has come to infiltrate all of the others, with air in the second place, since it is second in degree of subtlety, and so on for the rest. For the bodies that are generated from the largest parts will have the largest gaps left over in their constructions, whereas the smallest bodies will have the tiniest. Now this gathering, contracting process squeezes the small parts into the gaps inside the big ones. So now, as the small parts are placed among the large ones and the smaller ones tend to break up, the larger ones, while the larger tend to cause the smaller ones to coalesce, they all shift up and down into their own respective regions. For as each changes in quantity, it also changes the position of its region. This then is how and why the occurrence of non-uniformity is perpetually preserved, and so sets these bodies in perpetual motion both now and in the future without interruption. So I think you'd asked something earlier about void, right? Victor?
About
I mean, it was a lot earlier, but didn't you say something about void? Or didn't you have a question about that?
void.
Or no. I don't think it was somebody else maybe. But I forgot who it was. I think it was the other guy that joined us earlier. But it seems like, to my this seems like, even though he doesn't address, well, he kind of does say, he says that that things are being constricted. But it seems like the interpenetration of the elements would seem to explain movement despite the denial of void. I don't know if I got that right, but anyway, you want me to keep going?
Sure.
All right, so
you take over for a bit, I can take over.
yeah, sure.
Next, we should know that there are many varieties of fire that have come to be. For example, there is both flame and the effluence from flame, which, while it doesn't burn, gives light to the eyes. And then there is the residue of flame, which is left in the embers when the fire has gone out. The same goes for air. There is the brightest kind that we call ether, and also the murkiest, mist and darkness. And there are other nameless sorts which result from inequality among the triangles. The varieties of water can first of all be divided into two groups, the liquid and the liquefiable. Because the former possesses water parts that are not only unequal but also small, it turns out to be mobile, both in itself and when acted upon by something else. This is due to its non-uniformity in the configuration of its shape. The other type of water, composed of large and uniform kinds, is rather more immobile and heavy, compacted as it is by its uniformity. But when fire penetrates it and begins to break it up, it loses its uniformity, and once that is lost, it is more susceptible to motion. When it has become quite mobile, it is spread out upon the ground under pressure from the air surrounding it. Each of these changes has its own names: melting for the disintegration of its bulk, and flowing for the spreading underground. But when conversely the fire is expelled from it, then since the fire does not pass into a void, pressure is exerted upon the surrounding air, which in turn compresses the still mobile liquid mass into the places previously occupied by the fire and mixes it with itself. As it is being compressed, the mass regains its uniformity now that fire, the agent of non-uniformity, has left the scene, and it resettles into its own former state. The departure of fire is called cooling, and the compression that occurs when the fire is gone is called gelling. Of all these types of water that we have called liquefiable, the one that consists of the finest, the most uniform parts, and has proved to be the most dense, one that is unique in its kind and tinged with brilliant yellow is gold, our most precious possession, filtered through rocks and thereby compacted. And gold's offshoot, which because of its density is extremely hard and has a black color, is called adamant. Another has parts that approximate gold and comes in more than one variety. In terms of density, it is in one way denser than gold and includes a small, fine part of earth, so that it is harder, but it is actually lighter than gold because it has large gaps inside of it. This, it turns out, is copper, one variety of the brightly gelled kinds of water. Whenever the earth part of mixture separates off again from the rest of the passage of time, this part called verdigris becomes visible by itself. And as for going further and giving an account of other stuffs of this sort along the lines of the likely stories we have been following, that is no complicated matter. And should one take a break and lay aside accounts about the things that always are, deriving instead a carefree pleasure from surveying the likely accounts about becoming, he would provide his life with a moderate and sensible diversion. So shall we then at this time give free rein to such a diversion and go right on to set out the next likelihoods on these subjects as follows. Take now the water that is mixed with fire. It is fine and liquid, and on account of its mobility and the way it rolls over the ground, it is called liquid. It is soft, moreover, in that its faces, being less firm than those of earth, give way to it. When this water is separated from its fire and air and is isolated, it becomes more uniform and is pressed together in itself by the things that leave it. So compacted, the water above the earth, which is most affected by this change, turns to hail, while that on earth turns to ice. Some water is not affected quite so much, being still only half compacted. Such water above the earth becomes snow, while that on the earth becomes what is called frost from dew that is congealed. Now, most of the varieties of water which are mixed with one another are collectively called saps because they have been filtered through plants that grow out of the earth. Because they are mixed, each of them has its own degree of non-uniformity. Many of these varieties are nameless, though 4 of them, all with fire in them, are particularly conspicuous and so have been given names. First, there is wine, which warms not only the body but the soul as well. Second, there are various oils, which are smooth and divide the ray of sight, and for that reason glisten, appearing bright and shiny to the eye. These include resin, castor oil, olive oil, and others that share their properties. Third, there is what is most commonly called honey, which includes all that relaxes the taste passages of the mouth back to their natural state, and which by virtue of this property conveys a sense of sweetness. Fourth, there is what has been named tart juice, quite distinct from all the other saps. It is a foamy stuff. It is caustic and hence hazardous to the flesh. As for the varieties of earth, first, such earth as has been filtered through water turns into a stony body in something like the following way. When the water that is mixed with it disintegrates in the mixing process, it is transformed into the form of air, and once it has turned into air, it thrusts its way upwards towards its own region. And since there is no void above it, it pushes aside the air next to it. And when this air, heavy as it is pressed and poured around the mass of earth, it squeezes it hard and compresses it to fill the places vacated by the recently formed air. When so compressed by air, earth is insoluble in water and constitutes itself as stone. The more beautiful kind of stone is stone that is transparent and made up of equal and uniform parts. The uglier kind is just the opposite. Second, there is the kind of earth from which moisture has been completely expelled by a swiftly burning fire, which thus has come to have a rather more brittle constitution than the first kind of earth. This is the kind to which the name pottery has been given. Sometimes, however, moisture gets left in, and we get earth that is made liquefiable by fire. When it has cooled, it turns to stone that is black in color, i.e. lava, And then thirdly, there are two varieties of earth that are both alike. Are the residue of the mixture of a great quantity of water. They are briny, made up of the finest parts of earth, and turn out to be semi-solid and water-soluble again. One of these is soda, a cleansing agent against oil and dirt. The other is salt, which is well suited to enhance various blends of flavor and has not unreasonably proven itself to be a stuff pleasing to the gods. There are also compounds of earth and water which are soluble by fire but not by water. They are compacted in this way for the following sort of reason. Neither air nor fire will dissolve masses of earth, because air and fire consist of parts that by nature are smaller than the gaps within earth. They thus pass without constraint through the wide gaps of the mass of earth, leaving it intact and undissolved. But since the parts of water are naturally bigger, they must force their way through it. And in so doing, they undo and dissolve the earth. For water alone can in this way dissolve earth that isn't forcibly compressed. But when earth is compressed, nothing but fire can dissolve it. That is because fire is the only thing left that can penetrate it. So also only fire can disperse water that has been compressed with the greatest force. Whereas both fire and air can disperse water that is in a looser state. Air does it by entering the gaps, and fire by breaking up the triangles. And the only way in which air that has been condensed under force can be broken up is into its elemental triangles. And even when it is not forcibly compressed, only fire can dissolve it. So, as for these bodies that are mixtures of earth and water, as long as the gaps within a mass of earth are occupied by its own water, which is tightly packed within the gaps, the water parts that come charging upon it from the outside have no way of getting into the mass and so flow around the whole of it, leaving it undissolved. The fire parts, however, do penetrate the gaps within the water parts, and hence, as fire, they do to water what water did to earth. They alone, in turns, cause this partnership of earth and water to come apart and become fluid. These compounds of earth and water include not only bodies that have less water in them than earth, such as glass and generally all stone formations that can be called liquefiable, but also bodies that have more water than earth, namely all those that have the consistency of wax or of incense. We have now pretty much completed our presentation of the kinds of bodies that are distinguished by their multifarious shapes, their combinations, and their intertransformations. Now we must try to shed some light on what has caused them to come to have the properties they do. First, we need at every step in our discourse to appeal to the existence of sense perception, but we have so far discussed neither the coming to be of flesh, or what pertains to flesh, nor of the part of soul that is mortal. It so happens, however, that we cannot give an adequate account of these matters without referring to perceptual properties, but neither can we give an account of the latter without referring to the former. And to treat them one or the other, to treat them simultaneously is all but impossible. So we must start by assuming the one or the other and later revisit what we have assumed. Let us begin by taking for granted now the existence of body and soul. This will allow our account of these properties to succeed the account we've just given of the elemental kinds. First, then, let us see what we mean when we call fire hot. Let's look at it in this way. We notice how fire acts on our bodies by dividing and cutting them. We are all well aware that the experience is a sharp one. The fineness of fire's edges, the sharpness of its angles, the minuteness of its parts, and the swiftness of its motion, all of which make fire severely piercing, so that it makes sharp cuts wherever it contours. It must be taken into consideration as we recall how its shape came to be. It is this substance more than any other that divides our bodies throughout and cuts them up into small pieces, thereby giving us the property as well as the name chromatizane that we now naturally call hot, thermon. What the opposite property is quite obvious. We should not, however, keep anything left out of our account. As the larger parts of the moisture surrounding our bodies penetrate our bodies and push up the smaller parts, but are unable to take up the places vacated by those smaller parts, they compress the moisture within us and congeal it by rendering it in a state of motionlessness, in place of a state of moving non-uniformity, by virtue of the uniformity and compression so introduced. But anything which is being unnaturally compressed has a natural tendency to resist such compression and pushes itself outward in the opposite direction. This resistance, the shaking, is called shivering and chill, and the experience as a whole, as well as what brings it about, has come to have the name cold.
Do you want me to take over?
Sure.
Sorry. Hard we call whatever our flesh gives way to. Soft whatever gives way to our flesh. And this is how they are relative to each other. Whatever stands upon a small base tends to give way. The form composed of quadrangles, however, is the least liable to being displaced because its bases are very secure, and that which is compacted to its maximum density is particularly resistant to being displaced. Heavy and light can be most clearly explained if we examine them in conjunction with what we call above and below. It is entirely wrong to hold that there are by nature two separate regions, divorced from and entirely opposite one another. The one, the region below, toward which anything that has physical mass tends to move, and the other, the region above, towards which everything makes its way only under force. For given that the whole heaven is spherical, all the points that are situated as extremes at an equal distance from the center must by their nature be extremes of just the same sort. And we must take it that the center, being equidistant from the extremes, is situated at the point that is the opposite to all the extremes. Now, this is the universe's natural constitution. Which of the points just mentioned could you posit as above or below, without justly giving the appearance of using totally inappropriate language? There's no justification for describing the universe's central region either as a natural above or a natural below, but just as at the center. And the region at the circumference is, to be sure, not the center, but neither is one of its parts so distinguished from any other that it is related to the center in a specific way more so than any of the parts opposite to it. What contrary terms could you apply to something that is by nature all alike in every direction? How could you think to use such terms appropriately? If, further, there is something solid and evenly balanced at the center of the universe, it could not move to any of the extreme points, because these are all alike in all directions. But if you could travel around it in a circle, you would repeatedly take a position at your own antipodes, or antipode, antipodes, and call the very same part of it now the part above, and then the part below. For the whole universe, as we have just said, is spherical. To say that some region of it is above, another is below, makes no sense. The origin of these terms and subjects to which they really apply, which explain how we have become accustomed to using them in dividing the world as a whole in this way, we must resolve by adopting the following supposition. Imagine a man stepping onto that region of the universe that is a particular province of fire, where the greatest mass of fire is gathered together, and towards which other fire moves. Imagine further that he has the power to remove some parts of the fire and place them on scales. When he raises the beam and drags the fire into the alien air, applying force to it, clearly the lesser quantity of fire somehow gives way to his force more easily than the greater. For when two things are raised by one and the same exertion, the lesser quantity will invariably yield more readily, and the greater, which offers more resistance, less readily to the force applied. And so the large quantity will be described as heavy and moving downward, and the small one as light and moving upward. Now, this is the very thing we must detect ourselves doing in our own region. When we stand on the earth and weigh out one earth-like thing against another, and sometimes some earth itself, we drag these things by force, contrary to their natural tendency, into the alien air. While both of them tend to cling to what is akin to them, nevertheless, the small one will yield sooner and more readily than the larger one to the force we apply that introduces it into the alien stuff. Now, this is what we call light. In the region into which we force it to go, we call above. Their opposites we call heavy and below. Now, the things having any of these designations necessarily differ relatively to one another because the various masses of the elemental kinds of body occupy opposite regions. What in one region is light, heavy, below or above will all be found to become or to be directly opposite to, or at an angle to, or in any and every different direction from what is light, heavy, below, or above in the opposite region. In fact, this is the one thing that should be understood to apply in all these cases. The path towards its own kind is what makes a thing moving along it heavy, and the region into which it moves below, whereas the other set of terms, light and above, are for things behaving the other way. This then concludes our account of what causes things to have these properties. Should I keep going? So as for smooth and rough, I take it that anyone could discern the explanation of those properties and communicate it to somebody else. Roughness results from the combination of hardness with non-uniformity, while smoothness is a result of uniformity's contribution to density. The most important point that remains concerning the properties that have a common effect upon the body as a whole pertains to the causes of pleasures and pains in the cases we have described, as well as all cases in which sensations are registered throughout the bodily parts. Sensations are also simultaneously accompanied by pains and pleasures in those parts. With every property, whether perceived or not, let us take up the question of the causes of pleasure or pain in the following way. Recalling the distinction made in the foregoing between what is easily moved and what is hard to move. This is the way in which we must pursue all that we intend to comprehend. When even a minor disturbance affects that which is easily moved by nature, the disturbance is passed on in a chain of reaction, with some parts affecting others in the same way as they were affected, until it reaches the center of consciousness and reports the property that produced the reaction. On the other hand, something that is hard to move remains fixed and merely experiences the disturbance without passing it on in any chain reaction. It does not disturb any of its neighboring parts, so that in the absence of some parts passing on the disturbance to others, the initial disturbance affecting them fails to move on into the living thing as a whole and renders the disturbance unperceived. This is true of our bones and hair and of the other mostly earth-made parts that we possess, but the former is true of our sight and hearing in particular, and this is due to the fact that their chief inherent power is that of air and fire. This then is what we should understand about pleasure and pain. An unnatural disturbance that comes upon us with great force and intensity is painful, while its equally intense departure leading back to the natural state is pleasant. One that is mild and gradual is not perceived, whereas the opposite is the case with the opposite disturbance. Further, one that occurs readily can be completely perceived, more so than any other, though neither pleasure nor pain is involved. Take, for example, those involved in the act of seeing. Earlier, we described the rays of sight as a body that comes into being with the daylight as an extension of ourselves. The cuttings, the burnings, and whatever else it undergoes doesn't cause any pain in it, nor does the return to its former state yield any pleasure. Its perceptions are the more vivid and clear the more it is affected, and the greater the number of things it encounters and makes contact with. For there's absolutely no violence involved when it is severed by the cutting and burning and reconstituted. Bodies consisting of larger parts, on the other hand, won't easily give way to what acts upon them. They pass on the motions they receive to the entire body, and so they do get pleasures and pains when they are alienated from their natural condition, and pleasures when they are once again restored to it. All those bodies which experience only gradual departures from their normal state or gradual depletions, but whose replenishments are intense and substantial, are bodies that are unaware of their depletions but not of their replenishments. And hence they introduce very substantial pleasures into the mortal part of the soul, but not any pains. This is clear in the case of fragrances, but all those bodies whose alienations are intense, while their restorations to their former states are but gradual and slow, pass on motions that are entirely contrary to those mentioned just before. Again, this clearly turns out to be the case when the body suffers burns or cuts.
Shall I continue? Or? I'll read from a different translation just for a change. It's by Waterfield, the OUP one. That will have to do as a description of those processes in which any and every part of the body may be involved, and as an account of what the agents of these processes are called. We must next turn to processes which happen in particular parts of us and try, if we can, to explain what they are and how they are caused by their agents. Now, our earlier discussion of sapidity was incomplete, and we should first explain as best as we can those processes which are specific to the tongue. It looks as though they too, along with most others, happen as a result of certain things contracting and expanding, but they also seem to depend more than any other kind of sensory experience on roughness and smoothness. When particles of earth enter the mouth and encounter the moist, supple flesh of the regions of tiny veins, which are the tongue's taste samplers, so to speak, and run from the tongue to the heart, the particles are dissolved. If in the process of dissolution they make the veins more compact and dry, then those particles that are quite rough taste astringent, and those that are less rough taste harsh. Some solutions, however, rinse the veins and scrub the whole tongue. Those that do so to excess and inflict enough damage to decompose a layer of the tongue. This is the action of soda, for example, are called bitter, while those that are weaker than soda and whose scrubbing action is less severe are called salty. They lack the harshness of bitter things and they produce quite an agreeable sensation. On the other hand, when the particles combine with the warmth of the mouth and have the edge taken off their roughness by it, and then are made as fiery as the source of the heat and in their turn heated up, they become light enough to rise up towards the sense organs of the head, and on the way, they cut into whatever they encounter. All these particles that do this are called spicy. And when these same particles have been lightened by decomposition and entered the narrow veins, those of them that are proportionate within the earthly particles, both with earthy particles lying inside the veins and with those that contain a portion of air, stir them into random movement around one another. In their random movement, the particles of earth and air are dislodged and changed places, and thus they create pockets that are wrapped around the particles that are entering from outside. So when a pocket of moisture, earthy or pure, as the case may be, is wrapped around air, moist containers of air, hollow spherical bits of water are created. Those that consist of pure moisture surround their contents as transparent bubbles, as they are called, while the agitation and rising of those that consist of earthy moisture are called effervescence and fermentation. And what causes all these processes is called acid. The opposite explanation is needed for the quality that has precisely the opposite description to the one just given for acidity. When the composition of particles that enter, once they are within their liquid surroundings, approximate to the condition of the tongue, it smears a smooth surface over the rough bits, tightens up those bits which have become unnaturally diffuse, and relaxes those which are unnaturally tight, and restores everything as much as possible to a normal state. Everyone finds such a remedy for abnormal tightness and looseness quite pleasant and enjoyable, and it is called sweet. That's enough on that topic, and now for the nostrils and what they do. There are no specific figures involved because every scent is a half-breed. No single figure, as it turns out, has the properties, nor has the proportions that would give it a scent. Our scent veins are too narrow for earth and water, too broad for fire and air, which means that no one has ever smelled any of them. Scents occur when things are damp, or decomposing, or dissolving, or giving off smoke or vapor. That is, they occur in an intermediate stage when water is changing into air and air into water, and all scents are vapor or mist. Mist being what affects the transition from air to water, and vapor the transition from water to air. It follows that all scents are more subtle than water and more gross than air. The best opportunity for understanding scents is when your nose is blocked and you have to make an effort to breathe in. On such occasions, no scent filters through. The breath is drawn in by itself without any scent. And so all the various scents are nameless because there aren't a specific number of types of scent, nor are they straightforward. But let's here draw the only obvious distinction there is between pleasant and unpleasant scents, and say that unpleasant scents roughen and assault the whole of the trunk between the head and the navel, but the pleasant scents mollify the trunk and restore it with a feeling of contentment to its normal state. The third part of us that is involved in sense perception is the organ of hearing, and we must next investigate and explain its experiences. Broadly speaking, let's take sound to be a blow delivered by air through the ear on the brain and blood and transmitted to the soul. And let's say that hearing is the movement beginning at the head and ending in a region of the liver caused by the impulse. When this movement is rapid, the pitch of the sound is high. Slower the movement, lower the pitch. Steady movement produces a uniform, smooth sound, and the opposite kind of movement produces a harsh sound. Loud or soft sounds are produced respectively by great or small movements. As for harmonious sounds, we must leave them for a later stage of the discussion. I guess that gets quite complicated. The fourth and final kind of perception contains so many varieties that we must divide it up. We call them all colors. Each of them is a flame that flows from individual bodies and whose particles, being compatible with the organ of sight, produce vision. I've already explained how sight occurs, but no more than that. And so now it makes excellent sense for us to cover colors. The following account would seem to be reasonable. The particles that travel from external objects and encounter the visual ray are of various sizes, some smaller, some larger, some the same size as the particles of the visual ray itself. Those that are the same size are imperceptible. In fact, they're precisely those things that we call transparent. Those that are larger contract the visual ray, while the smaller ones expand it. So these larger and smaller particles are close kin to the hot and cold particles that act on flesh. The astringent particles and those heating ones we call spicy, that act on the tongue. Particles we call black and white then are the same as those qualities, but in a different category, and they appear different from each other for the reasons given. And so we should use the names accordingly. White is what expands the visual ray, and black is the opposite. When a different kind of fire with a faster movement strikes the visual ray and expands it all the way up to the eyes, it forces apart and decomposes the actual openings of the eyes and expresses from them a flood mixed fire and water, which we call weeping. Since this fast-moving force is itself fire, when it meets fire from the opposite direction, the one leaping out from the eyes like a flash of lightning, and the other forcing its way in and being extinguished in moisture, the ensuing turmoil creates all sorts of colors, and we call the experience dazzling. What causes it? Bright and shiny. There is also a kind of fire which is intermediate between these last two. It reaches the moisture of the eyes and blends with it, but doesn't dazzle. And to the gleam of the fire through the moisture with which it is mixed, which produces the color of blood, we give the name red. When bright is mixed with red and white, the result is orange-yellow. But it would be foolish to try to state precise proportions of the mixture, even if they were knowable, because one couldn't with any degree of plausibility come up with either a proof or a likely account of them. Red mixed with black makes magenta, violet as a result when the mixture is further burnt and more black is mixed. The mixture of orange, yellow, and gray produces yellow ochre, while gray is a blend of black and white. Yellow comes from the mixture of white and orange yellow. The combination of bright and white steeped in deep black produces dark blue. Dark blue mixed with white makes light blue. Yellow ochre blended with black makes green. As for the rest, it should be more or less clear from these examples what mixtures you must say they are equivalent to, if we are to preserve a likely story. But if one were to investigate these matters by actually putting them to the test, he would be displaying ignorance of the difference between human beings and gods. It is a divine matter to possess sufficient knowledge and at the same time sufficient competence to mix a plurality into a oneness, and conversely to break a oneness up into a plurality. There is not now, nor will there be any human being who is up to either of these tasks. Is this anti-empirical or?
No, it's fascinating. In a way, I think it's probably a natural place to pause.
Yeah. It's interesting that I guess that, yeah, there's always this question about what color is meant to the Greek, right? And what whether their words for colors marked out the spectrum in a different way. It's quite interesting. The wine dark sea and Greeks not having blue and all that. Yeah. I guess it just surprises me he goes into such kind of a systematic detail through every combination of every element.
Right, and I wonder to what degree, I'm sure it's been researched, and I'll want to look this up, but I wonder to what degree he's sort of recapitulating something, tradition that's from before him, right? I mean, kind of setting it down. I'm not certain.
Yeah, it seems like just really determined to prove that, everything fits together absolutely without any room for any doubt.
I mean, what was the state of atomism at this point in terms of as a philosophical school? Because I mean, this reminds me of Lucretius, of course, but he's Roman. But I mean, I haven't looked too much into this, but I know he goes into painstaking detail, on the shapes, the textures of the different atoms, difference between savory and sweet. I'm sure there's other texts like that, but of course that comes afterwards.
Mhm. At the same time, his overarching aim is that this is only a likely or a reasonable approach, right? He doesn't claim that it's the absolute reality.
Yeah, and I guess the sucker punch is kind of right there at the end when he says that if you put these matters to an actual test,
Right.
he would demonstrate his ignorance of the difference between the human and the divine.
Like if you try to actually do it, then you're just being really, really like ignorant of your own limitations.
Yeah, no, I get the sense that rhetorically, I mean, maybe I'm just dull and I don't, because I don't have a kind of view of the world. I wasn't raised, I don't believe either if you were, just being part of the modern world, we're not raised this sort of view of the material world, but I don't know, I get this sense that it's almost the level of detail he goes into, especially with the colors. I mean, he's kind of just firing off different combinations. I mean, I'd wonder like you saying earlier about the classification of color or how the Greeks conceived of it. I mean, I wonder if is this the basic? Did he mention all of them, or the ones that he's intentionally leaving out? Because he kind of just stopped. He says, as for other hues, it's fairly clear from the above. But I'm not saying there's, this is a parody, but you get this sense almost that he's trying to. You kind of go insane, I think, after reading it's just wave after wave of, just the complexity. Yet there is an order, and you're right, like you said earlier, that he's trying to show that these things are all kind of fits seamlessly. But
yeah, I think that thought that passed through to me as well. Is the whole thing kind of a big joke, really?
Yeah, I don't know so much of a joke. I mean, I can see that, but I think maybe part of it's just to show that. I mean, I wonder if it's a commentary on the although I think the little I've done of the reading of the pre-Socratics, it seems like they're just kind of, if you go to intro to philosophy, they'll be like, oh, this guy liked fire, this guy liked water, this guy liked. So it's probably that's probably way too reductive, but I think you get a sense of wow, we really need, we really need something like a Pythagorean theory of I guess mathematical symmetry and proportion for this stuff to make sense. But that could just be me reading this.
Yeah, maybe that's what we're useful to know, whether the genre of this is he following a kind of a accepted philosophical genre.
Can you remind me where we've got to so far?
68
D or
D. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm just about to have to head off, so.
Sure. What was I see. So 68. What was the last thing that you read? You read.
Well, right before E, I suppose, whether to dissolve unity into plurality. While no human being could possess either of these, whether at the present time or any time in the future.
All right, so and then where was the place where we were going to stop?
I think it was there. Because I think from here he starts talking about necessity, which seems like it's, it seems to take a slightly different track. And then he goes into the next page, he goes into the makeup of the body.
Good. Well, I think I'm a bit worn out, and I've got to.
Yeah.
Um,
No, this is a pretty intensive reading.
yeah, but thanks for helping me get through this, and I think that this will be beneficial for people who want to go over this later, and I'll sort of keep tabs and try to see if we can resume this at some point. And I think I think it's good to get through the text itself like this.
Right. Then
I guess see everyone the next time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Looking forward to it.